Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Millennial Smart, and welcome back to the 100 Greatest Wrestlers of the 21st Century. Kicking it off at number 40 with Sasha Banks. You know, it's funny, too, because I was actually, believe it or not, I was actually saying to myself whether or not I wanted to put her in the top 40 or underneath the bottom 40, because in reality, when you think about her actual accomplishments and you try to correlate or coincide it with her actual ability as a talent, you may argue that some of the people that I put underneath her were maybe a tad bit better. But then you have to bring into the equation the influence, right? And that's when things get pushed completely over the top, because Sasha Banks is undoubtedly, whether you like it or not, or whether you like her or not, and trust me, I'm not one of her biggest fans, one of the most influential women wrestlers of all time. Right? I already talked about Bayley early on, but you can kind of extend the same credentials to Sasha Banks as far as who she influenced to get into professional wrestling. You know, the Cora Jades of the world, the Roxanne Perez's of the world, probably dozens upon dozens of NXT women and even AEW women, right? I think Billy Starks is really influenced by her as well, right? And even some of the talent, like the ones that were visiting Bayley's school, right? Like Izzy, for an example, right? Hell, she was personally affected by Sasha Banks. But you know, you go all the way back to the NXT days, and it always seemed like Sasha Banks was kind of destined for greatness because of her charisma early on, right? Ignore the fact that she was one of the, forefronters for that whole women's revolution stuff that happened back in 2014, 2015. You just look at what she was doing purely on NXT alone. I mean, you can argue that she was one of the first ever big established heels in that brand's history, right? Like before Sasha Banks, who was really a leading heel from a women's perspective in that division. At least ones that can be notable, right? Sasha Banks was not only the first notable heel in NXT history, but you can make a strong association with the fact that her pushing forward in NXT as a heel set the groundwork for people to come directly after her, right? And speaking of, the work that came directly after, gotta talk about it, folks, because it is historical context. You look at Sasha Banks and you look at her race as a black woman, half black at least. Regardless, though, that also lends credence to her legacy overall for pushing that a little bit forward, right? Breaking barriers for certain women, right? Or at least helping to extend breaking the barriers for certain women that was kind of stemming off of what women like, Jazz or Jacqueline or, Awesome Kong or even Aja Kong, if you want to relate to half black, half Asian, half whatever, right? She's black still. All that stuff led up to a Sasha Banks who pushed that forward, and with her and you can even bring up Naomi if you want to. Also, she predates Sasha Banks in WWE. All that leads up to women like Jade Cargill or Bianca Belair, for an example, right? So yeah, of course, I'm gonna be able to look at the overarching premise of what I'm trying to suggest, and yeah, I can't be biased. I have to look at that, and I have to say to myself, like, yeah, there's a reason behind that, right? And like I said, when she comes to the actual main roster in itself, and she's doing the works with the likes of a Charlotte Flair, maybe, I don't know, you can make an argument, the biggest women's feud in WWE since, put aside my subjectivity for an example, or put aside my subjectivity as of right now, objectively looking at it, you can argue that Sasha Banks and Charlotte Flair feud that was in 2015 was probably the biggest women's feud since maybe Trish and Lita, right? From WWE's objective lens. And then you think about all the matches that she participated in, right? You talk about last man standings or last woman standing matches, or talk about Iron Man matches, multiple Iron Man matches at that. Breaking barriers as far as main eventing shows, right? She was the first ever, I think she and Charlotte were the first ever women to have Hell in a Cell matches. And she main evented that show, if I'm not mistaken. And she main evented the show with Bayley, right? And on top of that, she had one of the greatest women wrestling matches of all time with her and Bayley at Brooklyn. Already talked about that with the Bayley stuff. Mind you, all this stuff was already accomplished in WWE, maybe even prior to 2017. All of this, right? And then you push forward, and she's still making history, being the first ever women tag team champions with the likes of a Bayley. I think she was one of the first ever women to participate in the Elimination Chamber as well. Just history after history after history, right? And, she had some controversies, like when she walked out of WWE, not even, the 2022 walkout. I'm talking about, her walkout and, or was it 2023? Either 2023 or 2022. I'm talking about her walkout back in like 2019, when she came back to WWE, and she had that admittedly really, really good Hell in a Cell match with Becky Lynch. Saved that show, to be quite frank, if you remember what the main event was. All that stuff happened, and it built up to her, eventually leaving WWE. Mind you, she had a pretty solid run with Bayley and the COVID time period in 2020. Pretty much carried the SmackDown brand, and for sure carried women's wrestling for WWE for a time period. And, she being women's champion after the whole Bayley feud, leading into WrestleMania, and then dropping the belt to Bianca Belair. All that stuff, I guess she kind of felt like she was taken for granted, right? And eventually, that led to her, like the following year, leaving WWE, walking out with Naomi. Or maybe that was a year after. I think it was the following year. I think her and Naomi walked out in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong about that, though. But that's what it led up to. And then she started to, pretty much, fill some things that she wanted to do, fulfill some dreams, some jobs that she wanted to do, like in, Japan and all that other kind of stuff, and wrestling on the indies in general. She swapped her name from Sasha Banks to Mercedes Moné. And now she's in AEW, and now she's doing this as well, right? She's winning multiple championships. I think she's literally won every damn women's championship, like in North America, besides the AEW Women's Championship, which I'm pretty sure that's going to happen sooner rather than later as well, right? And whether or not I like it, people, critics, they always rave about Sasha Banks' matches, Mercedes Moné matches, and they put her over like crazy extensively when it comes to how good her matches are. So, yeah, it's pretty easy why I would put her in the top 40 from, the actual accolades, from the history that she's made multiple times, from just the objective fact that she is highly influential in women's wrestling and still going strong today, and she's still young. I mean, it's crazy to think that she did all this, and we're the same age. We're like, I'm 33, Sasha Banks is 33. It's fucking crazy when I think about it. It kind of puts things into perspective if you ask me. But yeah, Sasha Banks kicking off the list at number 40. He's one of a kind, and he's number 39. Bars, I know. RVD. Let's get it. Rob Van Dam at number 39. What can I say about Rob Van Dam that hasn't been said already? I think the first thing to talk about when it comes to Rob Van Dam, like, we're going to talk about everything that he's done for the business in the 2000s going forward. But I think the most notable thing to talk about is the fact that Rob Van Dam might honestly be top 5 coolest wrestlers of all time. Right? I think that's what most people tend to focus on when it comes to Rob Van Dam initially, is that Rob Van Dam is fucking cool. Like, he's just cool. Like, whenever you watch RVD on TV and you see his personality, you automatically think of like your older brother, right? Or your older cousin, or your older uncle, or your neighbor who your mom wants to call the police on, but you're telling her to mind her business because he's giving you the good shit, right? That's who Rob Van Dam kind of reminds you of, right? He has that certain aura about him that just gives you like a damn, I want to be like him, bro. I want to be just like him. I bet he gets all the bitches, all this other kind of stuff, right? Like Rob Van Dam, he always reminded me, I forgot the name of the character. I haven't watched this movie in fucking years, man. It was Sean Penn's character, and not Ferris Bueller's Day Off. What's the name of that movie again? Fast Times at Ridgemont High. He reminds me of that Sean Penn character. Always has, always will, right? But that's who Rob Van Dam always was, right? He was this ponytail guy who did fucking kung fu moves and he smoked weed. And honestly, you can make an argument that RVD was one of the first people to kind of make that cool heel thing a thing, right? Now, that's a pretty negative connotation if you ask me, but you tell me before Rob Van Dam, right? Now, obviously, you have some, ambiguous characters like a Stone Cold Steve Austin, for an example, or like a Sting when he put the black and white on, right? Obviously, the Attitude Era, for the most part, was made up of completely ambiguous characters. But with a Rob Van Dam, there was no ambiguity attached to it, right? It was literally a guy who was super duper fucking cool, was not acting like a heel at all as far as how he conducted himself in the ring. Everything that pertained to Rob Van Dam as a heel strictly was relying on the story, that being the invasion story, and the fact that he was on the ECW, WCW side, right? That's the only thing that even remotely let you know that RVD was a heel, because even when he wrestled, he will always have 50-50 matches, unlike, most heel babyface matches, which is typically 75-25, especially back in those days. And people still cheered the fuck out of him. You can argue that Rob Van Dam was maybe the most over guy in 2001. He was. Maybe even 2002 to a certain degree as well. He was really that fucking over. The fact that this outsider from ECW, who wasn't even a thing in 2000, I mean, to wrestling fans, of course, but in WWE, wasn't even a thing, to come directly into WWE and go directly into, doing stuff with Jeff Hardy and impressing so many people that now, like, you're putting him in stuff involving Kurt Angle and Stone Cold Steve Austin, and in some cases, The Rock, and eventually The Undertaker and Kane, and it's like, holy shit, this is not a guy coming from WCW, their rival promotion. We're talking about a guy who was coming from some rinky-dink bullshit bingo hall company and ECW, where, again, that's like the equivalent of a guy. Let's just pretend today that AEW doesn't exist, right? Or you can pretend AEW exists, but pretend AEW and ROH are separate entities, right? That would be the equivalent of someone coming from ROH, right? In the middle of the AEW WWE feud. WWE acquires AEW and they're feuding, and some fucking random person from ROH shoots up, and now they're taking the guy from ROH and putting him directly in a triple threat match with like CM Punk and Seth Rollins or Cody Rhodes and Roman Reigns. You just won't see that today. Someone getting punked, not off of AEW, but off of ROH, to be feuding with the likes of Cody and Roman or Punk and Rollins. It makes no sense, but that's what Rob Van Dam did. That is the equivalent of what he did during that time frame, right? And as the years start to go on, the amount of Intercontinental Championship runs he had, Hardcore Championship runs he had, Tag Team Championship runs he had, with the likes of like Booker T, for an example, or I think he was Tag Team Champions with Kane at one point, if I'm not mistaken, as well. Like, that's who Rob Van Dam was. And eventually, you get to the peak of RVD's career when he won the WWE Championship. At the same time, he was the ECW World Champion. And yeah, I might have mixed feelings as far as how RVD actually won the championship belt, because Paul Heyman was the referee who made that count at One Night Stand against Cena. And that's probably the worst finish I hate finishes like that. I hate finishes like the Paul Heyman and RVD John Cena finish. I hate the finish at, Over the Edge 98 with Austin and Dude Love, with Austin taking McMahon's hand and he's out cold and he's making him do the 3 count. I hate fucking finishes like that. It just ruins the credibility of the match. But that's what they went for, and that's what they went with, and RVD was co-champions. And yeah, RVD was pretty much, Vince didn't fuck over RVD. No one fucked over RVD. RVD fucked over RVD. Him and Sabu getting caught in that car with the weed and everything at the height of RVD as champion was a bad look on the company. How do you get pulled over with drugs in your car? That's how they establish it. I don't believe weed is a drug, but you know how they thinking, back in those days. How do you get caught in your car with illegal substances? Let's say that. And you're the head of the company. Obviously. Right? And yeah, his career was never the same ever again, and he did get released, so I don't know if he got released or he quit like the following year, but that happened, and he had a pretty decent run in TNA, but it was never the same like it was in, the 2000s in WWE, but nevertheless, it was still a fun run. All the matches that he had with the likes of a Jeff Hardy, all the matches that he had with the likes of a Chris Jericho, how he helped establish talent like a Brock Lesnar, the matches he had with Eddie Guerrero at Judgment Day, at at Backlash 2002, the Battle of the Frog Splashes and all that stuff. I remember Sender's Robin, an awesome YouTuber. He said something on the lines of, you wanted to see Rob Van Dam and Eddie Guerrero have an Iron Man match, and the first person to score the amount. But you can only get score points based off of the amount of frog splashes you connected. Such a stupid fucking idea. But I remember him talking about that like a decade ago or something. Sender's Robin 24, by the way, if you guys want to check him out. Great YouTuber. But yeah, RVD making it at number 39 as one of the greatest wrestlers of our times. Now, I know I'm going to get hella pushback on this, and some people are really, really, really not going to like this placement. Some people may think he should be a little bit higher. Some people may think he should be top 20. I disagree. With the people that I have on this list, I think he perfectly fits right here. Now, when it's all said and done, when the dust has finally settled, I would have no problem putting Seth Rollins a lot higher on this list. But as of right now, I think he comfortably sits at 38. I think with his most recent run, as far as what he is trying to establish, I might boost him up a little bit, but I think it's way too recent to look at the fuller context of his entire career coinciding with what he done in his recent run. Not to mention, if anything, that's just purely based off of the actual, qualifications, right? If you look at the actual structure of his previous run, that's a perfect example why I have him at 38, because that was a shitty run. His run as WWE champion, as the leader of The Vision, is it's funny too, because with Seth Rollins has always been what plagued him the most when it comes to him being presented as WWE champion. It's just like his lack of creative structure is so blatantly fucking obvious, right? Dude, in my opinion, whenever he was the lead of something, it just wasn't good. Whether we're talking about the Authority stuff, it sucked. The Authority angle fucking sucked. Whether he was doing that whole architect bullshit when he was leading the company in 2019, that was fucking trash. And now we're talking about him once again leading Raw alongside with the likes of CM Punk, pre-injury. It fucking sucked. Everything Seth Rollins fucking touches ends up fucking sucking from the standpoint that it's boring. But even with that being said, that does not take away from the influence of Seth Rollins and what he's done within WWE. Obviously, we go all the way back to 2012. No, we're not focusing on, fucking FCW or NXT or anything like that. Although I do want to notate another reason is he's the first ever NXT World Heavyweight Champion. So I would put that over. But outside of that, look at his work in 2012 into 2014. Obviously, The Shield. What more can I say about The Shield that hasn't already been said already? One of the greatest stables of all time. Even if I have my differences, one of the greatest stables of all time for what they have objectively done for WWE in the landscape and how they created 3 main event talents out of that group. Everybody, it has a 100% success rate. How many stables can actually say that? How many? A 100% success rate. Not even something like the New Day, because Xavier Woods has never won a WWE championship, right? But the Shield, all 3 of them won the World Championship. As a matter of fact, at one point in time, all 3 of them have the World Championship on one night. Money in the Bank, 2016. Or was it 2015? I think it was 2016. I said it right. Yeah. But then you push forward, obviously, with all they did with the Shield and stuff like that, you get to the point in time where Seth Rollins now has to turn on the Shield. Like I said, I don't have to like Seth Rollins to point out the fact that what he did as far as breaking up the Shield as a character is one of the best turns in wrestling history. I'm not going to say it's number 1, not going to say it's number 5. Quite frankly, might even be hard pressed to say number 10. But if you take into its totality how many turns we had into professional wrestling, the fact that Seth Rollins will even be mentioned in the top 20 greatest turns of all time is fucking bananas. It's like this entire list, 100 greatest wrestlers of the 21st century, when we're talking about thousands, tens of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of wrestlers who have existed past 2002, past 2000, huh? You tell me. That's what I'm saying. Take things into its take things into its, its immediate totality rather than just focusing on the actual list and how low someone is and how low someone, how high someone is and how low someone is. No, look at how many wrestlers existed in this time period, and then say to yourself, holy shit, he's in the top 100. That's Seth Rollins when it comes to the turn with the show. Like, yeah, would I say any of the top 1%? No. But in the top 2%, that's still fucking ridiculously high, right? And he did that. He took his chair and he took out Roman Reigns. He took his chair and he took out Jon Moxley, right? Dean Ambrose at the time. And his career exploded. One thing I will also notate about Seth Rollins is that I'm pretty sure, just like everybody at that time, I always said to myself that Seth Rollins was going to be the one to get the least, right? We knew Roman was going to break out. We had a feeling that Dean Ambrose was going to be straight because he at least knew how to talk and he had a character, and people perceived him to be the leader of the show anyways. People wrote off Seth Rollins as being the next Justin Gabriel. If you guys remember back in the days, people thought he was just going to be that type of wrestler, that type of position, if you will. No, dude expanded his horizons and became one of the greatest WWE talents of all time. Whether I like it or not, I'm just looking strictly at the number of titles, the amount of time and longevity on top as a main eventer. He completely, exceeded my expectations, tenfold. And then you look at his work as, former, world champion multiple times, former Intercontinental champion. He was actually holding on to the Intercontinental championship and running with that championship belt at the time when Brock Lesnar had it held hostage. Remember that too. Seth Rollins, before he was WWE champion, he was the guy as the Intercontinental champion at the time who was running with that, right? And former United States champion as well. Former tag team champion multiple times. I don't think, did Seth Rollins win? I felt like Seth Rollins did win the Royal Rumble. He won the Royal Rumble in 2019, I want to say, right? I could be wrong about that, but I think Seth Rollins won the Royal Rumble in 2019. Dude has done it all. Main event at WrestleMania multiple times. Hell, main event at WrestleMania this year in the triple threat match with CM Punk and Roman Reigns. Main evented it last year in the tag team match with Cody and Roman and The Rock. Dude has done it all. And like I said, from that standpoint, even if I'm not a big fan of his, gotta say it, and gotta keep it copacetic. Number 37 on the list, JBL, John Bradshaw Layfield. And I think the number one thing to talk about when discussing JBL is how much of an overachiever he was. You can't stress this enough. He is by far the most overachieving wrestler, arguably, in WWE history. We're talking about a guy who started off as Justin Hawk Bradshaw, a mid-card, not even a mid-card, more like a lower mid-card, a jobber to the stars even, essentially, back in the mid-90s, right? A guy who was one half of the fucking Blackjacks, right? Trying to revive Barry Windham's dying career in WWE. That's who he was, an afterthought, a complete and utter afterthought. Dude was doing rivalries with fucking Two Cold Scorpio and the lower end of the mid-card in 1998 while Stone Cold Steve Austin was on top. And somehow, some way, he was able to get with Ron Simmons, right, Farouk. And they teamed up in the most random of fucking ways. We're talking about Bradshaw, a guy who, again, was feuding with the likes of fucking Flash Funk. While at the same time, you have Farouk, who is feuding with The Rock over the Nation of Domination at that point in time. Somehow, someway, by late 98, because their careers were going completely nowhere, getting together and forming the Acolytes, right? The APA, if you will. And they started off in the Ministry of Darkness with The Undertaker. Right, one of the first things I remember about them was the kidnapping of Midian, right? Dennis Knight. And them torturing him, in some fucking abandoned building or some shit in late 98 that was leading up to the resurrection of The Undertaker around the early portions of 1999 after the Buried Alive match with Stone Cold Steve Austin at Rock Bottom. But eventually, when we get to that point, the Acolytes around, let's say, late 99, mid to late 99, like somewhere after SummerSlam, split off from The Undertaker. And they started to still represent that dark side. You know, they're still called the Acolytes and everything. But you can see the transition from them being, you know, goons of a gothic character to now essentially being, you know, beer drinking, going to bars, starting fights and everything. You know what they always reminded me of? I don't know if you guys ever seen this movie. It's a George Clooney movie. Well, he started in it, but it's Quentin Tarantino's movie. It's called From Dusk Till Dawn. It's a vampire movie. It's these two. I swear to God, I remember when I was a kid, I used to always think, like, is that Bradshaw and Farouk? It's a black guy in the movie with like a mustache as well, or something like that, or some kind of facial hair, and it's another white guy who has facial hair and long hair, and they're both beating the fuck out of these vampires in this bar. I swear, if you guys ever seen From Dusk Till Dawn with George Clooney, I swear that white guy and that black dude, because they're friends also, they always reminded me of Farouk and Bradshaw. But you know, as time starts to go on, now they're revamping themselves. They're still called the Acolytes, but now they abbreviated it to APA, you know, the Acolytes Protection Agency, where this is a fun gimmick. Like, you know, they take money from people, whether you're a heel or whether you're a face, it doesn't matter. You pay them in money or you pay them in beer. They go beat the shit out of the person that you want, you know, to be protected from. They typically worked with Crash Holly. They had so many great segments and memorable moments with Crash Holly. And yeah, that's what they were doing at the time, right? And they kept this up for a while. You know, even then for a little while, you know, when they had the brand split in 2002, where you have Farouk on SmackDown and Bradshaw was on Raw with the Hardcore Championship, you know, even that was somewhat fun, right? But it was going nowhere. 2003, JBL, after winning the Hardcore Championship like a billion fucking times, that's no exaggeration either, came back together with Farouk. But it was notable. It was a notable difference because now he no longer has his trademark long black hair. He no longer has his goatee. He's now completely shaven. His hair is like silked back. It's completely cut off. And it's like dark blondish, right? He looks like a fucking politician. Well, that was done for a purpose, and that was done for a reason. Because eventually him and Farouk did split off, right? Right? They did split away, right? It was some, I can't remember the angle, but it was some ultimatum where I think Paul Heyman, when he was general manager at the time of SmackDown, made a match between, you know, Bradshaw and Farouk versus somebody else in the tag team match or something like that. And if they lost, they were going to get fired or something like that. And Paul Heyman made it a point to say, hey, JBL, you know, you can leave with your friend or you can stay around. And JBL chose to stay around, which turned him effectively heel. And that was around the time where George W. Bush, right? He was starting his re-campaigning, you know, to be president again. And it was really, really focused on the border. The border was an issue back then as well, like a key issue back then as well, right? And JBL was, that was some of the best. God damn, that was some of the best fucking television. That was so good. JBL, when he was kicking out the immigrants. Oh, man. This dude would go around and, like, you know, like the swampy areas in the border of Texas, right? Like, it would be like, you know, the swampy looking areas in Texas that borders between that and Mexico. And he would, like, go in the Bedlands and he would find, like, you know, all these immigrants and he would kick them out and shit like that. And it was just, it was fantastic. It was so fucking good. And it was clear that he was trying to revamp himself in this politician gimmick. And he did it so well because, you know, JBL legitimately, first shoot, he made a shit ton of money off the stock market, right? And he's been going on Fox News a lot lately and, you know, pretty much preaching Republican values, which people hated at the time because, you know, George W. Bush and everything, right? So it just made for a perfect fucking heel. He was such a bastard. He was such a fucking bastard. What he did to Eddie Guerrero's mom when he gave her a heart attack. Yo! Bro, obviously you remember the match with him and JBL, Eddie and JBL, that is, at Judgment Day in 2004, one of the bloodiest matches in the history of the business. That led to JBL winning the championship from Eddie, and another bloody match in their Texas Bull Rope match at the Great American Bash in 2004. And JBL just went on one of, and I think JBL was a better heel champion, a better champion in general than Triple H at this time. I'll be honest with you. I thought JBL was a better heel than Triple H. I hated JBL more than I hated Triple H at this time. Just the work that he did. He was beating people left and right in the most chicken shit of ways. From the likes of The Undertaker, from the likes of Booker T, from the likes of once again, Eddie Guerrero, going in, Big Show, for an example, right? Just beating talents left and right. It's like, bro, I was like, maybe 12 going on 13 in 2004, 2005. And it's like, when you're going to school and you're chilling with your homies at school and you're playing video games and, life goes by a lot slower, right? Life goes by so much faster when you're an adult, but it goes by fucking snail pacing when, you're a kid. So it felt like JBL's reign, right? It was he won the belt in like July or June-ish, like July, I believe. And he lost it in April to Cena. And it's like, bro, he had the belt for 9 months, but I swear to God, his shit fell for 9 years. And that's a credit to him as a talent. Had his own little stable with, the Bashams and, Orlando Jordan and I think it was Joy Giovanni or Amy Weber. Those two are interchangeable as fuck, so I can't remember. But yeah, that was JBL dropping the belt to John Cena at WrestleMania to do the deed. And I said it once and I'll say it again. As far as the most accomplished, well-established talents, as far as a guy who did his job to a T and made a star out of it, the most overachieving world champion in the history of the business is JBL. Best heel work, best run in general, best character work, and he even put over he even helped put over a star that was a generational talent, right? So kudos to JBL, and for sure deserves to be on this list. And that's not even talking about his accolades as a former Intercontinental Champion, United States Champion, Tag Team Champions up the wazoo, Hardcore Champion. Dude did it all, man. Dude did it all. Who's that jumping out the sky? R-E-Y Mysterio. Here we go. Yo, the master of the 619, Rey Mysterio. Booyaka! Yo, there's so much to say about Rey Mysterio when I was a kid growing up. I think for me, especially with my generation, how we looked at Rey Mysterio, more particular because of the mask and the high flying and stuff like that. And especially because that was around the time when anime was really, really getting popular in the United States. And, with the stuff that was still going on when we were kids, like Ninja Turtles and all that shit. Rey Mysterio was just like a real-life Power Ranger to kids my age at the time, back in the early 2000s, right? When he debuted in 2002, and he's like jumping off the top of the cage and all that stuff, he had the match with Chavo Guerrero, but I mean, like, when he jumped off the cage with the crossbody on the Un-Americans, that right there, like, Rey Mysterio was just so fucking cool. I'm gonna tell a story about that too, when, one of these days, right? Because my brother, he broke his leg pretending he was Jeff Hardy when he hit his leg on a vase. I'm gonna tell that story. Don't worry, eventually. But I also end up damn near. I'm gonna hold off on that. Because that's actually a really crazy story involving me at my grandmother's house. But let's just say I was trying to be Rey Mysterio when I was a kid, and it was very, very unsuccessful. Very, very, very unsuccessful. But look at Rey Mysterio as far as how he got over, bro. He sucks on the microphone. Let's just call it what it is. Rey Mysterio is one of the shittiest mic talkers in the history of the business. But what he lacked for, as far as his proficiency on the microphone, was made up for with his unbelievable amount of fucking charisma. It is crazy to think someone who lacks so much on the microphone can have so much aura. And Rey Mysterio was a perfect representation of that, right? We're talking about the different color mask in every fucking wrestling match, which opened up a shit ton of merchandise opportunities for him. The high flying stuff to coincide with the mask and all that shit. And it built up so many opportunities for him. Think about it. In 2002, when Rey Mysterio was first starting off on SmackDown, he didn't go directly into the Cruiserweight division. People forget about that. No, Rey Mysterio went off into the Cruiserweight division around 2003. In 2002, he was hobnobbing with the main eventers, with the Kurt Angles of the world, with the Benoits of the world, with the Edges of the world, right? That's who Rey Mysterio was fucking with at the time as a part of the SmackDown 6, making his impact right then and there. And eventually, he did just that. Had one of the greatest tag team matches in the history of the business at No Mercy 2002. Bro was only on SmackDown for maybe August, September, October, 3 months, and already had an instant classic in professional wrestling. That's who Rey Mysterio is. You go forward to 2003 and his work with Matt Hardy over the Cruiserweight Championship on SmackDown. Him and Matt Hardy has such incredible work that people forget. Him and Rey Mysterio actually main evented an episode of SmackDown for the Cruiserweight Championship. And had the whole 9 works with the celebration with him and Dominic, a young Dominic Mysterio in the wild. That's the kind of talent that Rey Mysterio was. Do people remember his World Championship match with Brock Lesnar? Around this time, actually, in 2003. It was December something in 2003. Yeah, he was doing that kind of work. And then you go into 2004, and he was running the Cruiserweight division. You go into 2005, and that's when the main event, the little big man, the giant slayer, Rey Mysterio, started to peek he started to rear his ugly head out, right? And he did his best work yet, as far as storytelling is considered, with an Eddie Guerrero. Former tag team champions, multiple tag team champions with an Eddie Guerrero, and Eddie started to get jealous, right? And with that jealousy came, weird custody battle angles. But putting that all to the side and, my lack thereof, I'm not really a big fan of that angle. I'm just looking at this objectively as far as the lens of WWE. That foreshadowed and kind of created a star also with Dominic Mysterio. It took about 20 years, but it still did it, right? And unfortunately, Eddie Guerrero did pass away, as we know, and Rey Mysterio kind of rolled that lightning to the main event scene. Won the Royal Rumble. I think he has the top 3 longest time in the Royal Rumble ever. He did that. He became a world champion at WrestleMania that year in a triple threat match with Randy Orton and Kurt Angle. And he just kept riding that momentum. And yeah, as the years start to go on with Ray, people don't really, give him his just due as much as they should give him his just due as far as being one of the first ever underdogs in professional wrestling, like a true underdog. Because really, Rey Mysterio has no business being in the position that he's in right now. If you look at the history of professional wrestling, going all the way back to the Ultimate Warriors or the Hulk Hogans and stuff like that, Rey Mysterio has no business being in the position that he's in. But he is. And he did. And people liked it. And people were able to look at that and reflect on that. The absolute ungodly amount of influence this man has had, not just on Lucha Libre, not just on the cruiserweights, not just on high flyers, but just on simply putting a guy in the main event scene who's not a Batista. It's ridiculous. Rey Mysterio, he made the blueprint of, it doesn't matter what size you are, it's, do you connect with the audience? Can you relate to the audience? And can you sell shit? If you can relate to the audience, if you can put on a compelling match and you can sell merchandise, then whatever size you are, doesn't matter. It's the Rey Mysterios of the world that gave guys like a Bryan Danielson to have a chance. It's the Rey Mysterios of the world that gave, guys, for an example, like, you could throw out any kind of name going forward in the future, right? Even in AEW, for an example, right? Even in AEW, gave them the credibility to say, hey, we can actually put guys like a Will Ospreay and all these other people on the top, and it wouldn't look ridiculous because it was guys like Rey Mysterio that paved that road for them early on, and other cruiserweights as well that we're going to get to on this list. But yeah, that's the kind of guy Rey Mysterio is. I don't think I would... Do I want to say that? I think I could say that, at least within that mix. I'd be hard-pressed to say that I would still be a wrestling fan, as strong as I am, if it wasn't for guys like Rey Mysterio who came into the business, WWE's business, that is, in 2002. And yeah, for sure, obviously, top 30, maybe even arguably I could have put him in the top 20. But I think top 30 is fine. Now I know I'm going to get a bunch of hate for this one right here. Boy, you done fucked up, Devontae. You put Ric Flair, at number 35. Are you high? Are you smoking some stuff that RVD gave you? Maybe that Matt Riddle sticky icky. No, I'm not, bro. Did you not read the list? Let me say this one more time, okay? The greatest wrestlers of the 21st century. Now, I know reading may be difficult. In the description box that has been there for every episode, you probably just look at that as it just being an aesthetic, but it's more than just an aesthetic. It's there for you guys to read, right? Ric Flair is arguably the greatest wrestler in the history of the business. If you look at my original 100 greatest wrestlers of all time, I had Ric Flair at number 2, only behind Hulk Hogan. But this is not talking about his career pre-2000. We're talking about Ric Flair's career post-2000. And the fact that Ric Flair is even this high up on the list just shows you how much respect I have for him and how much influence he had even in his lingering age. Because by the time 2000 hit, Ric Flair was already 51 years old. That was Ric Flair's age. He was 51, 52 years old type shit. That was Ric Flair. And the fact that he can still give back to such an extensive level is remarkable. We're talking about a guy who came directly into WWE off the heels of WCW as one half of the owners of WWE, right? Right? Him and Vince McMahon are co-owners of WWE. Shane and Stephanie sold their shares to Ric Flair. And look what that led to, from a character standpoint, the brand split. People forget about that. The brand split specifically stemmed off of what Ric Flair did, along with Vince McMahon. As time starts to go on, Ric Flair, now granted, he's in this, sorry sad sap role where he's losing matches and putting over talent, but it was all for a reason. He gets in the ring with a Brock Lesnar. I mean, obviously it's Brock fucking Lesnar, right? Has a couple of dream matches even with The Rock and shit like that, right? Has some quality matches with the likes of an Eddie Guerrero, all that kind of stuff. And eventually that leads into his stuff with Chris Jericho, and he lost to Jericho. He beat him at SummerSlam, but he lost to him at Unforgiven. And he goes backstage, and Triple H rocks up to him, and he's like, this isn't the Ric Flair that I know. Where's the Ric Flair that I know? Who's this sorry sack of shit that I'm looking at right now? This isn't the guy that influenced me to get into the business. And what did that lead to with Ric Flair doing? What did that lead to? Triple H and RVD having their match at Unforgiven in 2002. That led to Ric Flair giving Triple H a sledgehammer. Or I can't remember the finish. Either he gave him a sledgehammer or he gave him a low blow, some shit like that. But he helped Triple H win the match against RVD and retain his newly crowned World Heavyweight Championship. That was given to him, which is still shitty. We'll get to that later. And what did that lead to after that? That led to the formation of Evolution. Now, granted, time started to go on a little bit more, right? Granted, not a lot of new members were being added. At that point in time, Ric Flair was just acting as a manager for Triple H. And sooner or later, he started to manage someone else. Batista. And he was managing both of them separately. They never made point to the fact that Triple H and Batista were friends. Ric Flair just wanted to take Batista underneath his wing, and he just wanted to manage him. For a time period, Triple H and Batista were not aligned. And that effectively ended when we got around to February or January of 2003, where eventually a young Randy Orton popped his head up, and now he's a part of this, right? And yeah, we got a couple of setbacks. Orton and Batista both got injured at the same time, maybe even in the same match. Didn't they get injured in that match with the Dudley Boys? Something like that, but I think they both got injured at the same fucking time. And they were out for a little bit. And Randy Orton eventually did come back, I think he came back, I I think that's when Kane unmasked himself at the Madison Square Garden show, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's when Randy made his return, and he hit him with the RKO. Although I could be wrong about that as far as his return. And then Batista eventually came back, obviously, during the whole Goldberg bounty hunter thing at Survivor Series in 2003 when he collected the bounty. And now they're fully established as Evolution again. Took them almost the whole duration of 2003, and they almost swapped out Batista for Mark Jindrak, if you know the story. But it took them all of that to finally hit that point, right? And now they're a full unit. And with that unit, it came with Ric Flair and Batista being tag team champions, along with Triple H being the world champion and Orton being the Intercontinental champion. We'll get to that later on, obviously. All three members. Ric Flair is now one half of a tag team champion. And yeah, as the years start to go on, obviously Evolution, they dissolved and everything, right? You know, well, I don't want to focus too much on Evolution because we still have to get to Orton, Batista, and Triple H later on in the list. But that's what happened. And Ric Flair eventually had a feud with Triple H coming out of the 2005 Homecoming show, easy for me to say. And coming out of that Homecoming show, Homecoming, holy crap, cannot say that 5 times fast, right? He had an excellent match with Triple H in a steel cage, and he had an excellent one-on-one match with him at the Last Man Standing. I think that was the Royal Rumble. 2 excellent matches that it's crazy that people don't talk about those matches also, especially that steel cage match at what was it, Taboo Tuesday or Survivor Series, one of those 2 shows. But that's a fucking fantastic match as well. Not better than the Randy Orton steel cage match they had a year prior, but that match is also really good. And that led to Ric Flair, because mind you, this only stemmed off of the fact that Flair was going after the Intercontinental Championship, and Triple H fucking hated that. He hated the fact that Triple H was relegating himself to the mid-card. He didn't say it like that, but that's what he was getting at. And that's what Ric Flair was doing. He won the Intercontinental Championship eventually, I think from Carlito, and he held it. And that was like the last championship that held off Ric Flair from being the Triple Crown champion. You know, we're talking about the WWE Championship. He's a former tag team champion with Batista, Intercontinental champion. Maybe you can even say Grand Slam if you want to include the United States Championship lineage from WCW into WWE. And he's even still participating in high caliber matches at the Money in the Bank match as well, right? Took a superplex off the top of a fucking ladder. And then obviously he had his retirement match with Shawn Michaels. One of the greatest matches ever. Strictly just pure unadulterated storytelling. Everybody's going to remember Shawn Michaels, you know, loading up the kick and saying, "I'm sorry, I love you," before super kicking Rick. That is rent-free. That whole match is rent-free in a lot of wrestling fans' heads. And yeah, granted, Ric Flair did kind of fuck up that retirement a little tiny bit as time started to go on because it's Ric Flair. And yeah, you know, his TNA run was pretty ass. Got some good moments with him and Jay Lethal, though. But his influence on the 2000s, you know, from elevating talent in the mid-card, participating in matches that he had no business participating in, and more importantly, establishing 2 future Hall of Famers in Batista and Randy Orton. You know, rejuvenizing his own career and extending Triple H's. That's Ric Flair. One of the greatest wrestlers, if not the greatest wrestler of all time. Of course, I gotta put him on the list. 34. The Samoan submission machine, Samoa Joe. Now, obviously, like I said, I don't want to reflect too much on ROH, but I will bring up the fact that for a time being, Samoa Joe was the longest reigning ROH world champion at that point in time. You know, I think he had like a year or 2 long run in 2003 to maybe 2005. 2004, 2005, I can't remember, but he had like the longest reigning world heavyweight championship run during that time period, right? Obviously, I do want to also notate, you know, his matches, his trilogy with CM Punk. You know, they were fucking killing it on the indie scene at the time back in 2004. That was like everywhere. Everybody was tape trading that shit during the time. I remember watching their match on LimeWire for the first time back in 2004. And then obviously, you know, we want to actually talk about the TNA stuff, right? because he was undefeated for a long time. I think he went undefeated for like a full year before he lost his first match against Kurt Angle in 2006. But that's the kind of wrestler Samoa Joe was. You know, you get this guy who looks like the most unconventional wrestler ever, being able to pull off shit that is like, what the fuck? You know, it's enziguri kicks, his suicide dives outside of the ring. A guy that size should not be able to move in the way that he moved. He was so fucking dangerous and at the same time so engaging as a superstar as is. But also with Samoa Joe, like I said, you go to his TNA run, just the amount of influence. Because he's another one of those guys. Once you get into like around this territory of the list, it's a bunch of people who are just highly influential in the business, right? And Samoa Joe is one of those. We're talking about a guy who is actually able to have one of, if not arguably the greatest triple threat match in the history of wrestling. You know, obviously Unbreakable, 2005, Christopher Daniels and AJ Styles. I think that match, I think there's no exaggeration why I say this. That match, that triple threat match, is probably the favorite match of almost every AEW wrestler. And maybe even some NXT wrestlers. I think if you're around the age of, say, let's say around 25 and up, that's a match that lives rent-free in your head. And it did for me for a while as well. It still does. It still does. I remember when I seen the Unbreakable match for the first time, also on LimeWire. And that would have been around 2006, actually, when I watched it for the first time. It blew my fucking mind. Now, I was watching TNA at the time, or at least I kept up with it. I think it was still on Fox at that point in time. It was on Spike like a couple of months later. But at that point in time, in like August, September, I think it was still doing the whole Fox rerun shit. And, you know, I seen highlights of it, and I lost my fucking mind. But then you watch the actual match in itself, and it's like... yeah, that's the match that I probably... That match has made a lot of wrestling fans. I'll put it to you that way. That's probably the most influential match, arguably, in the post-WCW era that wasn't related to WWE. That is arguably the best non-WWE post-WCW match of all time. Right? Maybe even arguably the best 21st century match of all time that wasn't related to WWE. You can make a strong case for that. And he just kept pushing forward. Like I said, the stuff that he was doing with Kurt Angle, that was fantastic. His whole feud with Kurt Angle, just, it wasn't to that level, but I think it was like one step below the Benoits and the Lesnars of the world. It was like right there. If you say Brock or Chris Benoit is Kurt Angle's greatest rival, and you say Brock Lesnar is his second, or if you swap it, you know, you say Brock is number one and Benoit's number two, no matter how you want to say it, Joe is number three. Joe is Kurt Angle's third best rival of all time. Easily. They did like the highest pay-per-view buy rates of all time also, if I'm not mistaken, at one of the shows in 2008. Right, but Joe was on a fucking run. And yeah, his career kind of wind down in TNA because of, you know, horrible management. And, you know, Joe should have been the face of TNA for a while there, right? Him or, you know, Styles. You can even make an argument for Danielson if you like to. But for sure, him and Styles, that right there, that should have been your Austin and Rock. That should have been your Austin and Rock if you knew how to manage correctly, right? But it is what it is. Eventually, Joe did leave TNA. He did end up in NXT for a little while with his shitty LL Cool J ripoff garbage theme song. And then he ended up on the main roster with Brock Lesnar and shit, right? I mean, I know he came in with Roman Reigns, but most people remember him with Brock Lesnar the most, right? And it does suck, you know, because he did do some stuff with Brock, eventually did some stuff with AJ Styles, had a fantastic Fatal 4-Way match with, Roman and Braun and Brock Lesnar at, I think, SummerSlam or something like that. All this shit was fantastic. But the problem with Joe was that he was heavily injury prone, right? I think it had more to do with the concussions. And it led to him getting released not once, but twice. And he ended up in AEW. And he's doing some great work in AEW right now, right? As of the making of this video, he is their current AEW World Champion. And he's still on live television in the second biggest wrestling company in the world. But I think overall, when discussing Samoa Joe, it's discussing his influence on indie wrestling, and it's discussing the people that he had inspired to be professional wrestlers in AEW and in WWE, whether through his size and, like I said, his actual look that gave people who thought they did not deserve to be wrestlers, a thought in their mind that, hey, if I'm just athletic enough, it doesn't matter how I look, it's how I convey myself. He put that on the forefront as far as influence, and then obviously who he inspired just based off of just straight up how great his matches were. Samoa Joe is absolutely stamped and approved on my list. Can you dig it? Sucker. Oh, 33. Booker T, bro. Talk about an impact, bro. Talk about a fucking impact. You know how crazy it is to say that even before Booker T even showed up in WWE, I could have arguably still put him on this list just strictly off of his fucking WCW run in 2000 alone. That's how crazy this is. You can ignore Booker T's run in WWE from 2001 to today. You can ignore all of that, and he will still make it on this list, arguably, just off of his run in 2000. Yeah, that whole five-time WCW World Champion moniker, that's from the year 2000. Vince McMahon was Booker T's best friend that year, right? But we're talking about a guy who ended up being the last ever WCW World Champion. The last ever United States Champion, if I'm not mistaken, as well. For WCW as a promotion. He bled WCW. And mind you, talk about historic, right? He did it all as a black man. For people who want to focus on the historic stuff. Now, I'm not one to make the identity thing a forefront argument in Booker T's case, right? Because Booker T, it didn't matter about skin color. It mattered about the talent. And the talent was there first before the skin color was there. But it's just something that you have to note that Buddy was black and he was able to pull all this stuff off for people who care about racism and stuff like that, right? And as time started to go on, like I said, he could have made this list alone based off his WCW work, but he pushed it even further. He took a chance on himself. While everybody was sitting at their AOL deals, Booker T could have did the same thing as well. He came to WCW along with DDP, who could have done the same thing as well. Unfortunately, it didn't work out in his case, but it damn sure worked out in Booker T's case. He came in the WWE. Now, granted, the WWE stuff, his introduction. Now, the initial introduction was actually really good when he took out Austin at that year's King of the Ring. I think he actually injured Austin too. They tried to cuck him also. You're gonna hold. I remember Bruce Pritchard. You're gonna hold on to Austin's bag and walk around with his shit because you injured him. And Booker T was like, "My dick, I am. I ain't gonna do shit like that. Fuck you." So I always respected Booker T over that as well. But he did fuck around, and he could have probably got fired. You know what I mean? The Bruce Pritchard encounter, with denying wanting to, carry Austin's bags after injuring him by accident. And then he had that terrible match with Buff Bagwell at, Washington? One of the episodes of Raw. But it had nothing to do with how bad the match was as much as it was back in those days, the styles of wrestling really did matter. And WWE fans did not want to watch WCW stars. It was a bit of a division there, right? And that was the case with Buff Bagwell and Booker T at that Washington show. And it was even worse because you had Austin and Kurt Angle beat the fuck out of him and then throw him outside the back door and pretty much saying WCW sucks, which pissed off a lot of WCW fans online at the time. I remember going on forums at the time saying, seeing guys on AOL saying things like, "Oh, see, I told you guys Vince McMahon was going to do stuff like this." I was there. I was there in 2001 on AOL chat, boys. Seen a lot of unpleasant things also at that time. Early days of the internet. But nevertheless, though, Booker T did come back, and he was one of the leading figures in the whole invasion angle, right? And on top of that, he perfectly fit the WWE mold. He made himself like a part of the architect of WWE when he feuded with the likes of The Rock, right? Because people, including myself, always thought of Booker T as like the WCW version of The Rock. Or maybe thought of The Rock as the WWF version of Booker T at the time, right? Even had the finisher, right? Rock had the rock bottom, Booker T had the book end. And, yeah. Yeah, they did all that stuff, and it was fantastic. The work that him and Booker T did in SummerSlam, and at Unforgiven with Shane and shit like that. It was awesome. I wish he would have done more stuff with Austin, because eventually, after the invasion angle, Booker T did come back in a similar way as to how he did at the King of the Ring, and he attacked Austin also, in the unification match with Jericho. We'll get to that a little bit later on the list. But that's how Booker T actually got started as far as being a full-time member of the WWF roster post the invasion angle, and that's when you got the famous grocery store fight with him and Austin. They never had a one. I mean, maybe they did on television. They should have paid that off I still think they should have paid that off at the Royal Rumble. I do, especially when Austin wasn't even gonna win the Rumble, right? It was Triple H. They could have had Austin and Booker T pay that off at the Royal Rumble if they really wanted to. I don't know why they didn't do that, but hey, it is what it is, right? As the year started to go on in 2002 with Booker, he had some filler feuds here and there. I mean, most notably, it was his alignment with Goldust, right? They became tag team champions at Armageddon after a payoff for weeks and months of Booker T and Goldust, not being able to get along. It did pay off with them winning the tag team championship belts at Armageddon in their Fatal 4-Way match with the Dudleys and the Un-Americans and Jericho and Christian. Very OP-ass match. That was the opener for Armageddon in 2002, if you guys want to watch that match. OP-ass match. And in 2003, he was doing some stuff with Christian over the Intercontinental Championship. So you can see that his career was kind of lingering a little tiny bit. Although everything that Booker T was able to sink his teeth into, he made it the most. Even if it wasn't high up on the card, he made it the most. Like I said, whether we're talking about the Intercontinental Championship or the Tag Team Championships, he made the most out of every opportunity that he was given, including the people that he was working with as well. And like I said, 2004, 2005 started to roll on. Very lingering years. Did some stuff with Kurt Angle that we're not going to talk about because YouTube, you know what I'm talking about. I like that beast. Oh, I'm going to stop right there. 2006 hits around, right? And this is when Booker T really started to carve out his legacy for real in WWE. Like, he already pretty much made a path for himself, but this is what established him, right? The United States Championship stuff with Chris Benoit, the Best of 7 series. The run that he had when he was trying to establish a Bobby Lashley at the time, which he did, by the way. Finally culminating in the World Heavyweight Championship that he won from Rey Mysterio after the King of the Ring stuff. Having the feud with Batista and John Cena with his King's Court with William Regal and Finlay and Sharmell as his queen. Queen Sharmell. Made a career for her as well, too. Former WCW dancer. That was Booker T's run. And eventually, he left WWE and he went to TNA. Had a pretty decent run in TNA as well. He was the former Legends champion at the time. Go look that belt up if you want to. His wife Sharmell had a very famous match. Go look that up too. Actually, don't look that up. Don't look up the Sharmell match with the chick from the Survivor show. I can't remember her fucking name. That was a horrible fucking match. But Booker T established himself, right? Eventually, he came back to WWE, did some work with Cody Rhodes, and, transitioned nicely into the announcer role, started to work backstage more often, and now he has his reality of wrestling, and he's now starting to link up and start to branch off into cultivating more talents. That's who Booker T was. That's who he is. He laid the foundation for the future while at the same time being able to still keep himself relevant. He did it with WCW, he did it with WWE, he did it with TNA, and now he's doing it with NXT. The most relevant, most pop culture referenced wrestler. You talk about the Spinneroonie, obviously the 5-time, the Dig It Sucker, the dreadlocks. No, you didn't. Tell me you didn't just say that. It's Booker T for you, homie. Top 30. All right. Come on, get it over with. I already see you in the comment section because apparently, again, even with skipping through the list, you didn't hear what I said about Ric Flair. You would have heard what I said about. I said it off rip in the very beginning of the choice about Ric Flair. Do I have to reiterate myself again? Okay, 21st century. best wrestlers of the 21st century. Description box below. It's been there for a long time. Every episode. Yes, Cody Rhodes is 32. I'm not knocking Cody Rhodes as a talent. When it's all said and done, what he's been doing recently will rear its ugly head, and maybe he'll be top 20. Maybe he'll be top 10. He is the biggest wrestler in the world today. Yes, I will say that. Of course he is. But he's been the biggest wrestler in the world for maybe 2 years now. 2 years. What am I supposed to do with that? I can't do anything with that. No. Now, I will say those 2 years, those 2 or 3 years is what got him in this spot. It's what helped him get into the spot. But of course, how high can I put the guy? For real, for real. Yeah, Cody Rhodes is right there. And look, obviously you go to 2007 when he first started off with Hardcore Holly as the tag team champions, looking like a damn Day of Reckoning character. And then transitioning that into the Ted DiBiase run, and then eventually him and Ted, linking up with Randy and having Legacy. And, they have some cool matches with the likes of a Triple H and a Shawn Michaels at Hell in a Cell, and then they did some stuff with that. They even beat Triple H and Shawn Michaels, if I'm not mistaken. They're trying to establish them, right? Even Orton trying to put them over in the triple threat match at WrestleMania. I mean, he won, but he brought them to the table, right? Even though he kind of jobbed them out a little bit, but that's neither here nor there. What did Cody do afterwards? He became the Intercontinental Champion, one of the best Intercontinental Championship reigns of the 21st century. The work that he did with Rey Mysterio going into WrestleMania 27, one of the highlights of that garbage ass show. Brought back the white stripe, took off the mask, no longer doing the whole handsome Cody Rhodes or the grotesque Cody Rhodes stuff, which was actually pretty damn good too, right? He's now the, leader of the new generation, Cody Rhodes, as the Intercontinental Champion, right? You can argue all that work could have led up to Cody being a world champion. And I think, honestly, you look at what Cody was doing right then and there, if you didn't watch his TNA work to see his heel run right there, just focusing on Cody Rhodes' work in the early 2010s, it kind of gives you a glimpse as to what we can get out of a heel Cody Rhodes as time starts to go forward in the future. I think Cody as a heel will be fucking fantastic. But that's all Cody Rhodes did. That's all Cody Rhodes did for the most part in the early 2010s. The biggest highlight post tag team championship or post Intercontinental Championship run is his tag team match with Goldust against the Shield in 2013 at Battleground. That's the highlight, and that's a fantastic fucking match. That's a fantastic match with a fantastic story attached to it. Credit where credit is due, right? It kind of showed off the storytelling skills of a Cody Rhodes as time started to go on. But that's it. And then you kind of knocked him back a peg when he did the Stardust shit. Then, rightfully so, Cody Rhodes left. And he got his shit together. And he started to become one of the mainstays and one of the main fixtures on the indie circuit. He carried himself like a traveling Ric Flair circa 1979. That's how he carried himself on the indie circuit. He carried himself on the indie circuit in a very similar manner as to how the wrestlers carried themselves on the territory side back in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. And he did it purposely. He didn't do any, high-flying gimmicks or anything. He wore a suit. He held his championship like he was a Harley Race or a Nick Bockwinkel. And he walked around with a certain kind of aura about him that demanded your respect. And it got him to a point where he wanted to really show off his talents as a main event superstar, and it got him to that spot where Dave Meltzer challenged him and the Young Bucks to fill up an arena with 10,000 people, which he did. The biggest arena show that wasn't WWE in North America, post WCW, of course. That's what they did, right? Which led to the creation of AEW, which is what he led. And he was a fixture in. And he helped create talent in that brand as well. From Jade Cargill to Ricky Starks to MJF. And yeah, he left the company in an unceremonious way. But that's the legacy that he left behind before coming back to WWE, and now he's a straight up main eventer. You know, probably had the most famous match of the 2020s with that Seth Rollins Hell in a Cell match with the shoulder injury. Dude wrestled a match with a separated fucking shoulder. Had arguably one of the better feuds, if you extend the bloodline stuff to him, going into WrestleMania last year in 2024. That is arguably the best from a pure storytelling and from a pure wrestling standpoint. That is in a lot of people's top 5 best matches of the decade. And that's probably top 3, just looking at the match in its totality, best WrestleMania main events of all time. It's Roman and Cody Rhodes last year. And yeah, you look at Cody's run as of this year, it hasn't been the best. It hasn't. It just hasn't. You take people's opinions about Cody Rhodes being a boring, blubbering little bitch every time crying about his little daddy. My daddy wasn't there to take me to the fair, to change my underwear. I get it. I understand. But at the same time, though, he is one of the most influential talents and most credible talents to come out of that late 2000s time period. People forget, Cody Rhodes is technically a product of the Ruthless Aggression era. That's how far back he goes. He's a product of the Ruthless Aggression era. And to look at where he's at right now, almost 20 years of blood, sweat, and tears and influence that he has actually done within the business and the talent that he's established, isn't enough compared to other superstars? No, but it's substantial enough where he could be damn near in the top 20s. And that speaks for itself. So take it or cry about it. Cody crybabies. Now hear me out with this one, because I can hear everybody's criticism right now, right? Everybody who is going to probably see this position and say to themselves, Devontae, what did Mick Foley truly do throughout the 2000s? He barely wrestled throughout the entire decade. How the fuck can you actually merit his position being in this spot over the likes of a Cody Rhodes? Well, it's very easy, actually. Let's start off with the year 2000, shall we? Okay, best wrestling match probably of the entire fucking century so far goes to him and Triple H. I think that's a strong argument. I think the Royal Rumble 2000 match, which kicked off the entire fucking century, can easily go into most people's top 10 best matches of the entire century. Probably top 10 best matches of the last 25 years. Can we make that argument? Yeah, okay. Cool. Also, he had his match with Triple H, the Hell in a Cell, the following month. Now, I point this out because, let's see, we got our scoreboard up so far. That's one talent that Triple H was, that's one talent that Mick Foley made. Okay, let's go a little bit more forward. Let's say around 2003. Okay. Who was that guy that Mick Foley allowed to spit in his face? Huh? And then also kick down a flight of stairs? I'm wondering. Oh, he also allowed him to beat him at WrestleMania with his one time and latest reunion with The Rock at WrestleMania in Madison Square Garden. Who was that young man that Mick Foley allowed to take the pinfall from? Oh, and then obviously, you go into the following month, and he also had arguably another top 10 contender of the best matches of this entire century so far. At that year's back, that was Randy Orton. That was Randy Orton, right? One of the best matches ever, at Backlash 2004 for the Intercontinental Championship, elevating that title as well, right? Let's see. So we have Triple H so far. Okay, we have Randy Orton for the scoreboard. Okay, cool. We're keeping it. Okay. So let's go a little bit further into the future. Okay, we're gonna say around 2006. Okay, who was that young lad that was struggling in the mid card, right? I can't remember his name, man. All right, long blonde hair, he reeked of awesomeness. I think we talked about him earlier on in the list, right? Gonna probably talk about him a little bit later in this list as well. Who was that gentleman? What is his goddamn name, man? And he was always trying to take opportunities to take out people, right? Fucking God, I can't remember his name. But he was the guy that, had the hardcore match with Foley at WrestleMania that led to him winning the WWE Championship and becoming a mainstay in the main event scene against John Cena like 2 or 3 months later. Oh my God. Edge. That's his name, Edge. So let's see. We have Triple H, we have Randy Orton, and we also have Edge on that list. All right, just making sure. Oh, wait, sorry. Oh, I know we're talking about the 2000s, but there seems to be another note right there. The Rock, 1999. We're talking about the 2000s, okay? We're not talking about who he helped make in the 90s. We're talking about the 2000s. Yeah, are you catching my drift now? Because we're not just talking about talents that Mick Foley helped create and establish. We're talking about talents that he helped create and establish, and the matches that took place were fucking fantastic in the process. Are you following me here? Are you following me here, right? We're also talking about the role that he played in TNA. You know, he had some pretty decent matches in TNA also with the likes of Sting and Kurt Angle and everything. Abyss. Help make some stars over there too, or at least help extend, right? Go back a little tiny bit. Stay in 2006 for a moment. The match he had with Ric Flair at SummerSlam. I thought that was a pretty fun match. You see, Mick Foley's one of those guys, right? Where he might not have done a lot in that time period, but when he actually sinked his teeth into something, it was the best shit going at that point in time. Let me ask you a question, okay? Would you suggest that Roman Reigns is not one of the GOATs of this decade because he did not wrestle so much? No, you wouldn't do that, because you would say that, well, yeah, although he has not wrestled this much throughout this decade in comparison to his contemporaries, you would say most likely the shit that he did do was super effective to the degree where you can kind of look past the point that he did not wrestle as much. That is a Mick Foley times 100, because at least you can point to the fact that, well, okay, Roman Reigns, blah, 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 this, but it was all for Roman. Mick Foley did all of that, and it was for creating 3 of the biggest names in the entire industry. That's what he did. He set the groundwork for the 2000s to go forward, and he made 3 of the biggest heels of the 2000s. Edge, Orton, and Triple H are 3 of that might be the 3 biggest heels of the 2000s, just straight up, point blank. That's it. That right there. You can organize in whatever chronological order. Those 3, Orton, Triple H, Edge, those are the 3 biggest heels of the entire 2000s. And Mick Foley made that. You're going to tell me he's not supposed to be 30, because he hasn't wrestled a bunch of Yeah, that's what I thought. Never. I said it before, folks. I'm being objective here. Hate it or love it, he's gotta have a high position on this, man. He's way too influential. He's way too influential, man. Gonna call a spade a spade. Kenny Omega. He is absolutely in the top 30 most important wrestlers of the 21st century. I don't know how to not make an argument like that without looking super fucking biased. You know, obviously, you know, people talk about the matches like at, what was that? That was Wrestle Kingdom 13 with him and Tanahashi. I think that's when they were doing like the passing of the torch shit, right? With Tanahashi at the time. I remember hearing about that. I watched that match too. Obviously, you know, you talk about the trilogy with him and Kazuchika Okada. The first, not talking about the latest match they had at All In. I'm talking about like the actual trilogy, the one that you know, the last match and the, you know, the 7-star match shit, right? Obviously, you know, you talk about the matches with Will Ospreay. You know, you're talking about obviously maybe the best tag team match of all time in AEW with him and Hangman versus the Young Bucks. You know, Bryan Danielson and him had probably one of the best television matches of the entire decade so far. That's a fantastic match. Yeah, dude, I don't know. I don't know. If for anything else, you would probably say that he is a god amongst most indie wrestling fans. I think if you were to make up the best indie wrestlers list, right, it's gonna be 4 people, right? When you think of the best indie wrestlers of all time, it's gonna come down to 4 people, right? It's gonna come down to Punk, it's gonna come down to Danielson, it's gonna come down to Joe, or it's gonna come down to Omega. I think that's the 4 people typically focus on, right? It's gonna be Punk, Danielson, Joe, or Omega. And that's just talking about his New Japan work, and that's just talking about his indie work, right? Obviously, you come, and mind you, I would also say, give credit where credit is due, he did bridge that gap. He was maybe the strongest, he probably is the strongest, biggest bridge between American, or let's just say North American, because I know he's Canadian, you want to kind of say America and, Canada. Let's just say North America in general, right? He was the biggest bridge between North American wrestling and Japan wrestling. He speaks fluent Japanese and he speaks fluent, English. And he was a guy who, he was born to Western cultures and he fully embraced Eastern cultures with, Japanese culture in particular. So he understands both of them very well. And he was able to pretty much be the median between wrestling fans wanting to watch Japanese wrestling and maybe even arguably Japanese fans wanting to watch, AEW wrestling or something, right? Probably. I wouldn't understand why not, which might even transition them to want to watch WWE. And then you get obviously into the AEW stuff outside of the influence. And yeah, Buddy had what can I say? He's a former AEW world champion. He's the executive vice president of AEW. He helped start the fucking company. Right? So there you go with that as well. I think he was their first star along with a Chris Jericho, which by the way, their match that they had, I think it was for was it for the Intercontinental? I don't think they had the Intercontinental Championship match. I think they had that match in 2018. That's the match that also led and paved the way for AEW to become a thing, was the Jericho and Omega match. And like I said, you get into AEW and you have all these crazy matches with him, and like I said, the aforementioned him and Hangman versus the Young Bucks. Obviously, whether I like it or not, you talk about the Jon Moxley bullshit, like the Lights Out match in 2019. You talk about the stuff that he did, arguably with I think I talked about Danielson already, the television match. Hangman Adam Page and their long-running feud, right? All of that, man. And yeah, the Don Callis stuff has been absolute ass, and I fucking hate that, and I hate everything about that. But I understand that Omega's role right now, especially with his, hopefully he feels better, but with his, his health kind of deteriorating a little by little more and more, especially after the diverticulitis, diagnosis he had last year, trying to fight back to come back from that injury. You can see that he's most likely probably starting to get to the twilight of his career and wanting to wind down. And you take everything into its totality as far as what he did with Japan, and then you look at the AEW stuff. You can argue that Kenny Omega, and people are going to be like, Devontae, shut up. I'm not comparing the two careers, okay? Even though I probably can, honestly. But I'm more or less reflecting off of what this guy represents versus what that guy represents. That's the comparison. You can make a strong argument that Kenny Omega is the Sting of this generation, in the sense that this guy is super duper duper established, like super fucking established, probably one of the most prominent figures in wrestling in the world today. Never to ever have anything to do with WWE. And no, I'm not talking about your bullshit OVW or FCW nonsense. I'm talking about being on the main roster or even NXT. For a guy to be this prominent without the help of WWE in 2025 is unthinkable. But credit where credit is due. Him and the Young Bucks, they have done it. They have. You could throw Heyman in there as well. And as of right now, MJF. But Kenny Omega was doing that even prior to AEW. Like I said, I'm not going to be biased here. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm a big fan of Kenny Omega. But I understand and I get it and I see what everybody else sees, and that's what counts. Hide your children and hide your wives. It's the disgusting monster known as Chris Benoit. Now, I'm not one of those people who are going to look at Benoit's atrocities, his evils, and I'm not going to sit there and say, like, oh, because he's such a monster that I shouldn't have to highlight his career. I can separate the two. I can do it. Benoit's an evil piece of human garbage who's burning in hell right now. Absolutely. But even with him being a disgusting monster, I can absolutely focus on the fact, as of talking about Benoit in this context, that he is, without a shadow of the doubt, in my mind, for me and for my money, and for what I like about professional wrestling, the greatest in-ring talent in the history of the business. I don't sugarcoat, and I've said this plenty of times in the past, you guys know this already about me, I don't sugarcoat the fact that Benoit is the reason why I'm talking to you right now. His feud with Chris Jericho over the Intercontinental Championship in the year 2000, culminating in my favorite match of all time, being the Intercontinental Ladder match at the Royal Rumble in 2001. That is my all-time favorite match. That is the reason why I'm talking to you guys right now. That is what made wrestling a religion for me, is that Intercontinental Championship match at the Royal Rumble. Benoit is my all-time favorite wrestler. Jericho's my A1, Benoit's my A2. I don't sugarcoat that, and I don't hide that fact, and there's a reason why it hurts me more than anybody else. That's why I'm so harsh on Benoit. It's the fact that, like, I'm such a diehard fan of his, and then just to see what he did and ruin his legacy and the amount of people that he hurt, it's like, damn, I always feel like I don't know, like it's gonna sound weird when I say this. It's not to that degree, but almost in a similar realm of being cheated on by your significant other, right? Bear with me when I say that. Like, I don't mean it as the same thing, but like, you just feel like there's just such a, like, betrayal in trust when you see what Benoit, how much I was just such a diehard Benoit fan, and then what ended up happening. It's just such a betrayal. It's such a fucking betrayal. To the degree where I will maybe argue that there's a reason why, I don't know, it sounds weird when I say it like that, but why I haven't had a favorite. I mean, I've had wrestlers that I liked, but I haven't had a favorite wrestler since Benoit died, outside of Jericho, but that was just coming with the territory. I haven't had a wrestler who I was that infatuated with since Benoit passed away. That was new. But nevertheless, though, you look at Benoit and his run in 2000, fucking fantastic. Dude came in with the Radicals and went directly to the main event scene. Feuded with the likes of The Rock, feuded with Kane, feuded with Undertaker. Obviously feuded with Jericho throughout the year 2000. Going in 2001 and having this fantastic feud with Kurt Angle over the gold medals. The match at WrestleMania 17, the Ultimate Submission match at Backlash, the 2 out of 3 falls, 3 stages of hell, I guess you can call it technically, at Judgment Day in 2001. The work that he was doing with Jericho and Austin over the Tag Team Championship belts, and, with Triple H involved as well, and then eventually the World Championship, having his neck broken and coming back bigger, better than ever as a part of the SmackDown 6, and having some of the craziest matches, period, with those guys, culminating in arguably one of the greatest matches of all time, maybe arguably right behind the ladder match. That is my second favorite match of all time. Behind the ladder match is Benoit and Kurt Angle at the Royal Rumble in 2003, which is maybe my second favorite match of all time, but my favorite one-on-one match of all time. All the work that he did, the United States Championships, the Intercontinental Championships, former Tag Team Championship wins, culminating all of that, broken necks, sweat, blood, tears. At that point in time, 18 years of wrestling, culminating in one of the most emotional moments in wrestling history when him and Eddie Guerrero embraced each other at the end of WrestleMania 20 as world champions. Gets to me every time, man. And as time starts to go on, obviously, Eddie passed on. And Benoit wasn't the same. I'm not going to get into the intricacies. This is not that kind of video for that. still having killer matches, doing stuff with Finlay, doing stuff with Booker, doing stuff with William Regal, still killing it. But in reality, while killing it, he's killing himself. And, his last ever feud, his last, gift to wrestling, I guess you can say, is helping establish someone like an MVP. And he was supposed to have his match with CM Punk at that Vengeance show in 2007. No need to go into details. We know what happened. It's been talked about extensively. It happened. He did what he did. And he cemented his own legacy by doing what he did. I'll put him on the list because, again, I'm not one of those people where it's like I'm going to ignore him. I can't. He's an important part of wrestling history. And speaking for myself, he's an important figure in my fandom as a wrestling fan. So I'm not going to ignore him. But yeah, let's just end it. Benoit's number 29. Let's continue on. Number 28, Charlotte Flair. Woo! Devontae, you're trolling me right now. You're going to put Charlotte Flair over Ric Flair? Again, you're not thinking clearly, okay? You're thinking with your heart. You're not thinking with your brain. You're not thinking with your head. Yes, of course. It has nothing to do with how good or how bad Ric Flair is, or how good or bad Charlotte Flair is. It's the fact that Charlotte Flair did more for women's wrestling in the 21st century than what Ric Flair contributed overall to wrestling at that point in time. It's not to say that Ric Flair did not contribute a lot, but it's to suggest that Flair in her lane did more for her lane than what Ric Flair did for his lane at that point in time. Do you understand? Do you get it? Do you now you get it now? Okay, cool. That's the third time I said this now. Between Flair, between Cody, that's my third time saying it. Catch up, pay attention, focus, all right? So, with Charlotte Flair, we kick it off, obviously. She was, and I will say, she has had one of those, what would you say? Not unfamiliar. I don't think that's the best word to say. Let's say unconventional. One of the most unconventional startups, right? Because what I can say, how I remember Charlotte Flair, I remember her in a stable with Sasha Banks, yes, because, besties are now best enemies, and Summer Rae. That's how I remember both of them. Summer Rae and Sasha Banks, which, by the way, as of this video, this is a Monday, today's Monday. We're like 3 days away from Christmas. I did hear about Summer Rae and her. I think she had like a cancer scare or something like that. So hopefully she's okay. But nevertheless, though, as of the making of this video, by the way, Charlotte Flair did progress out of all that, right? With the Summer Rae and Sasha Banks stuff, and she was establishing herself as the face of NXT. Putting on killer matches, mind you, with the likes of the Four Horsewomen, all three of them, right? With Bayley, with, Sasha, with Becky Lynch. But she took herself way serious, right? You had Becky and Sasha as the heels, and you had Bayley as the babyface, wanting to be good friends with Charlotte. But Charlotte, she was very ambiguous in her character, in the sense of, like, she's a babyface because she hates all the heels, but she kind of acts like a heel because she doesn't want to have anything to do with any of the wrestlers, regardless if you're a babyface or a heel. She just really was very title-centric. She was very focused on establishing her legacy. Very contrast to how she is right now with Alexa Bliss, again, as of the making of this video. And that's how she pushed forward, right? Had a killer match with Natalya at one of the TakeOver shows, if I'm not mistaken. Had a fantastic match, if you ask me, with the likes of Sasha Banks as well, right? Had a great. This was the only time I remember the Four Horsewomen in a Fatal 4-Way match. That was a fantastic match as well, right? And it was Sasha actually winning the World Heavyweight Championship, or the Women's World Championship for NXT. And that transitioned Charlotte from NXT to the main roster, right? And she almost immediately established herself as a dominating figure by beating Nikki Bella to become the Divas Champion at the time. And you could see the wheels starting to turn, the climate of the political climate of the world of that day You know, people were tired of seeing the women getting naked, unfortunately, and all that stuff. And they wanted to see the women actually placed on the forefront, right? And it was at the height of all that stuff that was happening politically as far as equality, equity, and all that stuff that was going on, where eventually it coincided with WWE, and we were seeing the elevation of the women talent. And the forerunner, the forefront superstar of all of that was Charlotte Flair. And you could say that she was pounding down everybody's. I get that. I understand that, right? She's a former NXT champion, former Divas champion, former SmackDown and Raw Women's Champion, former Tag Team Champion. I get it. I understand, right? She's done everything but win the mid-card championship belts. I get it. Former Royal Rumble winner, all the good shit, right? I get that. The thing with Charlotte Flair, in my opinion, even if she was shoved down everybody's throats, is that she still had that. The accomplishments still were there. There's somebody else who was shoved down everybody's throats. As a matter of fact, I can probably make an argument that the top 10 that you're going to see later on next week, that entire top 10, everybody was shoved down everybody's throats. Right? It's whether or not you like the superstar or you hate the superstar, which I'm not taking that into equation when focusing on any of this. I'm talking about the objective things that these girls and guys have done. And it's not just the titles, right? We're talking about WrestleManias. Charlotte Flair, she was the main event of WrestleMania. Not even like night one WrestleMania. We're talking about WrestleMania. I think that was probably the last WrestleMania to have the standard format as to was back then. Charlotte Flair main evented the last WrestleMania that was formatted in that manner. She was the last WrestleMania main event, and the first who was a woman. What can I say? Influence, I think that doesn't have to be spoken on. I think we know what Charlotte Flair has accomplished and who she's influenced and what she's done for professional wrestling. Like I said, shove down everybody's throats. I get it. I understand the sentiment. But the accomplishments still are there, whether you like it or not. Think she deserves a spot on the list. Again, whether you like it or not. Number 27, Kane. Now, I know for some people they might look at Kane and they may say to themselves as well, like, Kane was never really... Kane is a... And I get that sentiment. Kane is a very roller coaster of a career as far as like what you would consider to be like the highs and the lows. Because when Kane was at his low, he was at his low, right? Obviously, look at the authority angle, for example. But when Kane was at his high, he was at his high. Obviously, you look at when he unmasked himself in 2003. So it's a very roller coaster career. But notice what I just said. Notice the key words that I said when I compared the authority angle in 2015 to the unmasked angle in 2003. 2015, 2003. 2015, 2003. That's 12 years. Just that alone is 12 years. He started off in 2000, and he started to really wind down his career around 2018. He was very consistent on the main roster for about 17 or 18 years. Consistent. Through injuries and all that stuff. Big man. Kane is... You guys just need to go see Kane back in 2000. Just do me a favor. Pause this video for a second. Or keep it going and go on Google and search up Kane's name and put in the year 2000 and look at that machine. No pun intended. He was actually a big red fucking machine. Dude was built like a goddamn fucking brick house. Dude looked like he was made out of fucking granite. He came into the decade as a former world champion. Now, granted, he only had it for a day, but nevertheless, a former world champion. You know, established himself, former Intercontinental champion, former Hardcore champion, had a fun match with Raven and Big Show at WrestleMania 17. Former Tag Team champion, obviously, with The Undertaker and Big Show. His work throughout that time period, constantly staying in the main event scene, constantly helping to establish talent, like a Chris Jericho, for an example, at around 2000. Now, granted, Jericho was already established, but further established and trying to prepare himself to reach that next level that Kane has already achieved in WWE's rankings, right? And then you look at 2002 for an example, and yeah, it wasn't the best stuff, but at the same time, you get around that middle portion when he's the Intercontinental Champion. You know, he's the guy single-handedly winning the first ever TLC match in Raw history. I mean, probably the only as well, as far as the tag team format is considered. Him having this match with Triple H at No Mercy that year for the World Heavyweight Championship, unifying that for the Intercontinental Championship. Now, granted, two things came out of that were terrible. The retirement of the Intercontinental Championship, which was completely unnecessary, and obviously the shitty Katie Vick angle, but that's what Kane was doing at the time. And like I said, we get to 2003, and he unmasked himself, and he went on a killer run, no pun intended, with Shane McMahon. And yeah, the angle had a couple of disturbing turns here and there, because Kane and Shane were literally trying to kill each other, but it was great television. It was a great angle, in my opinion, and that led to Kane burying the Undertaker at that year's Survivor Series and bringing back the Dead Man at WrestleMania 20. That's how Undertaker was, reintroduced as the Dead Man, was through that Kane angle, which I'm pretty sure you guys are aware of. And yeah, like I said, it gets to a point where I can understand some of your points and some of your concerns as to why I put Kane on the list, because you get around that 2005 to, more or less 2010 period, and you can say to yourself that Kane was definitely he could be as low as a jobber to the stars, or he could be as high as a guy in the lower main event scene. But that's another thing as to why I put Kane on there, is because he was consistent. Super duper consistent. Never mind the amount of titles, never mind the placement on the card. He was always on your television, and he was always menacingly. Right? That's what you can say about Kane. He was always there and always consistent. And in 2010, he did win the World Heavyweight Championship, and he actually had somewhat of an extensive reign, right? He had a pretty long reign. It lasted from I want to say the Money in the Bank. I want to say it lasted from July or maybe June, around that time frame in 2010, all the way up until November, December of 2010 as well. So it was a long reign as World Heavyweight Champion. Brought back Paul Bearer for one last run before his unfortunate passing. Did some stuff with Edge that was absolutely fucking cringe-inducing. And actually, the Undertaker angle was kind of lame too. But that's what Kane was doing. That's how consistent he was. Brought back the mask in 2012. Did some stuff with Bryan Danielson with the Yes shit. I actually get I was 20 at the time, and I get nostalgic for the whole, Bryan Danielson Kane stuff, right? I actually get somewhat nostalgic for that sometimes. Obviously, the matches that he participated in throughout the years. I already notated some of the stuff with Triple H, but he also did some stuff with Kane, Chris Jericho, obviously Undertaker. Yeah, hell, even the Shield and that 3-on-3 chaotic TLC match they had in 2012. Kane was always there. He was always a consistent fixture on the card. He can be fit in the main event scene, or he can be fit in the lower card. Kane was just always there on television. And although he's probably not a wrestler anymore, I don't think he's ever formally retired. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. He's also a Hall of Famer, by the way. He's one of the most notable names ever in the history of professional wrestling. And yeah, Kane's that dude. Why the Dudley Boys, number 26. Arguably, I'm looking at my list right now. I think they might be the highest ranking tag team on my entire list. I think the Dudley Boys, yeah, they're the highest ranking tag team on my entire list. And there's a reason for that. Because they literally, between all the companies, I wish they could have, came to WWE in 2000, right? It would have fit because they still would have got the match in with the Hardy Boys at the Royal Rumble. If they would have came to WWE in the 2000, even if it was January of 2000, I can actually say that they wrestled for multiple companies in a short period of time. It would have been ECW, would have been WWE, would have been New Japan Pro Wrestling, would have been TNA. Unfortunately, ECW was just a couple of months prior before they came to WWE, like August or September of 99. But they did show up, and they kicked ass, and they took so many names, right? The matches, and I talked about this extensively, between Edge and Christian and the Hardys and the Dudleys. I've talked about this plenty of times, the TLC matches, the table matches, the ladder matches, all fucking good, right? I think the key component between the Dudley Boys, the Hardy Boys, and Edge and Christian, that in my opinion may have arguably gotten even the Dudley Boys more over than Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys at that point in time, you can make a strong argument for that, was that they had more charisma at that point in time as a tag team unit than Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys, right? From the standpoint of how many of those tag teams had legitimate trademarks they can do in every match, right? You had the Dudley Boys with the Razab, obviously, right? Then you had the Devon, what? Get the tables, right? Or you had Bubba Ray having that crazy look in his eyes after he powerbombed the woman through a table because he got wood. That's a thing that they used to say back in the days, boys and girls. Or the flying headbutt in the nuts. Obviously, 3D. They had so many fucking trademarks. So many. I will argue that they had about as many trademarks in the tag team division than The Rock did as a single superstar. So many recognizable things, right? Obviously, they come out to the stage. You see the missiles flying down on the stage. Yeah, I fucking love the Dudley Boys. And obviously what they did throughout the 2000s, I think most people need to understand too, most of their trademarks came like as far as fruition and like the latter portions of 2000. I feel like people always say like the Dudley Boys were the Dudley Boys completely in the early portions of 2000. It was like towards the latter portions, like after SummerSlam arguably of 2000, right? Is when they became what they were. But even in that time period, right? Like I said, with the Dudleys and the Hardys, they won their tag team championship belts from the New Age Outlaws, which was probably their last ever reign as tag team champions. And they were probably the best tag teams of the 90s, was the New Age Outlaws, or at least towards the latter portions of the 90s. I'll probably say top 10 overall, though, the 90s. Because you still got to take it to, consideration, the Heart Foundation and the Legion of Doom and, all those teams back in 1990. But, the Dudley Boys, as they started to lead on towards the 2000s, having matches with X-Pac and Road Dogg and Tori getting involved. I think the thing with the Dudley Boys as well, even more so than Edge and Christian, and definitely more than the Hardy Boys, was that they were always dabbling within the main event scene, even as a tag team unit. Like, whether they were doing things with, like, say for an example, teaming up with The Rock or Chris Jericho, they were always somehow, some way, always battling opposite of Triple H. Maybe never directly, but they were always on the opposite side of Triple H, right? Or Road Dogg, or X-Pac, or Billy Gunn for that matter, or just the McMahon and Helmsley regime in general. They were always opposite, and they were always afforded the opportunity to main event. And then they were always able to siphon that and then transition that into who they were as characters, which represented a whole subsection. And then Edge and Christian and the Hardy Boys did the same thing. And that's how you ended up getting the matches that you got with the star power that were involved without having to put togethers. I wish wrestling would understand that nowadays. My God. And AEW, for example, does understand that. That's why they have the Young Bucks in the position that they're in right now. Whether you hate them or whether you love them, that's why they're in the position. The same way as how the Young Bucks is being represented right now is maybe a step above how the Dudley Boys were represented at the time in WWE. But nevertheless, though, you go into 2001. Obviously, you had the classic TLC match at WrestleMania 17, right? And now they're in the Invasion angle. Now they're representing the ECW side of things and the Invasion angle on, aligning themselves with the Alliance. The angle they had with Spike Dudley and Molly Holly, the shit that they were doing with, the Hardy Boys with Stacy Keibler on their side. And they split up for a little bit in 2002 when Devon was Reverend Devon and he was a heel, and Bubba was, still doing this thing, pretty much a one-man Dudley Boys gimmick in 2002, and, had Spike to his side. Had a couple of actual matches with Triple H, too, over the World Championship, if I'm not mistaken. And they got back together at the MSG show at Survivor Series in 2002, towards the end of the match. Won the tag team championships, here and there. And eventually they left WWE in 2005. Went to TNA, revamped themselves as Team 3D, and they killed it there too. The matches that they had with, obviously, LAX, the Electrified Steel Cage is probably not a good example, but still LAX. The Motor City Machine Guns is another team. The forgot the name of the British team with Magnus, the now Nick Aldis, and Brutus, whatever the fuck his name was. They had some tag team matches with them as well. America Most Wanted. They were just, Beer Money, excuse me. They were always just doing something, right? They were always consistent in something that was always on the upper card. That was the Dudley Boys. And now they've just recently retired, so it's like they're no longer doing their thing, and they're now fully established as legends, as Hall of Famers. I mean, they are already Hall of Famers in WWE's Hall of Fame. The Dudley Boys could have a strong argument as to the title of the greatest tag team in wrestling history, if for nothing else, their longevity. Bubba Ray and Devon got together in like 1996. And they just retired probably like 2 or 3 months ago. Or probably like a month or two ago, actually, against the Hardy Boys in TNA. That's a near 30-year run as a tag team. Spawning maybe 6 or 7 different companies. That's Dudley Boys for you, man. Maybe for my money, the greatest tag team of all time. I know some old heads may disagree with that. Understandable. But for my money, they're the greatest tag team of all time. And for sure, the best tag team of the 21st century. We've now made it, boys. We've done it. We are now in the top 25 best wrestlers of the 21st century. The top 25. The 0.1%, if you will, right? And I'm going to give credit where credit is due. Right? Becky Lynch is, without a shadow of a doubt, the biggest women's wrestler to come out of the women's revolution. Becky Lynch, whether I like her or not, and I don't like her, is the biggest women's wrestler of the last 15 years. Actually, I take that back. We're going into 2026, the last 20 years. She's the best women's wrestler of the last 20 years. The most recognizable, the most consistent. You don't have to like it. All you have to do is focus on the historic stuff that she's been doing throughout the last 6 or 7 years as of right now? Going on 8 years? Now, mind you, with Becky Lynch, she wasn't even supposed to be in this position. It feels like she wasn't even supposed to be here. Everything that has happened to Becky Lynch coming out of the Four Horsemen stuff, it feels like it was owed to Charlotte Flair. That's what it feels like. It feels like everything Becky Lynch ended up being from an accomplishment standpoint and from an actual reaction and recognition standpoint, that was supposed to be towards Charlotte Flair, and she just came and usurped all of it. The heat that she was able to garner after the turn on Charlotte when she turned heel on her at SummerSlam in 2018. And mind you, forget about all that. Forget about the run that she had as a fucking leprechaun transitioning into her steampunk gimmick in 2015 in NXT or 2014. Look at what she did in 2016. I think she is the inaugural SmackDown Women's Champion. I think. If she's not, she competed for it. I think she is, though. That's who Becky Lynch was. Triple threat match at WrestleMania, right? Mind you, this was all prior to what she eventually ended up doing in 2018. This was 2 years. And 2018 did hit, and this was frustration for getting lack of opportunities in 2017. You might even look at her run in 2017 and think to yourself that there's a possibility that she might be released. That's how much she was lacking at that time. And she found her way into the triple threat match with Charlotte and I think Carmella. And look what happened. She blew the fuck up. She turned on Charlotte. That amount of carbonated enthusiasm from fans to get behind Becky Lynch, and you take a bottle of resentment that's trying to contain all that enthusiasm, and then she turns on Charlotte and you don't even twist the top off. It just explodes. That's the best metaphoric comparison I can have to a Becky Lynch at that point in time. And people loved her. People loved her, and she just kept trying to be a heel. Even when after Edge and John Cena, she was so desperately trying to get over as a heel, and it just wasn't working because fans loved her way too much. And that culminated. And I will give credit where credit is due. It culminated in probably one of the more iconic pictures that any women's wrestler has ever taken. You know, they had that whole little, Survivor Series brand warfare bullshit going on, and Nia Jax accidentally punched Becky Lynch in the face, broke her nose, right? And that was probably the greatest happy accident that has ever probably happened in WWE since fucking Triple H ended up screwing himself out of the curtain call and giving Austin that position for the King of the Ring. Becky Lynch stood on the top of the stairs with a broken nose, leaking blood like a fucking faucet, and with her disformed fucking arms and elbows extending out in the most gross way possible. She is sitting there on top of the stairs with blood leaking from her face, her hair disheveled like a motherfucker, looking towards the ring, I think at a Ronda Rousey. And they take that picture, and that picture right there is one of the most iconic photos of the 2010s in WWE. That is that is her Stone Cold Steve Austin blood dripping down the face moment at WrestleMania 13, which fully put her over, and they had to turn her face. Now, granted, she wasn't really truly a face. Speaking of Austin, she was a tweener, right? She was always an ambiguous character in the sense that she was just pissed off. She was just always pissed. It had nothing to do with whether you're a heel or a face. Very Austin-esque in the sense of it just didn't matter. You can get it if you just happen to be in Becky Lynch's way. And she resonated a lot with a lot of the wrestling fans. She was the most popular, most over wrestler in the, not women's wrestler, the most over woman, the most over wrestler in general in the world in late 2018. That's just the truth. That's just the truth. And then with the stuff with her, on Twitter, going back and forth with, Ronda Rousey, blasting everybody, her Twitter game was on point. And that led to her winning the Royal Rumble in 2019, which led to her doing the angles with Ronda and Charlotte. And you can argue that it was super fucking cringe, the majority of it. It led to her winning the Unified Women's Championship belts at WrestleMania. And she went on a year-long run with those belts, only dropping it when she got pregnant. Yeah. And look at what she's done since. Her 2018-2019 run would have been enough to suffice her being on this. But then you look at her stuff later on, and then you see what she accomplished as time started to go on throughout the rest of her career. Still winning championship belts, former Intercontinental Champion, former Tag Team Champion as well. The amount of women that she's trying to establish and put over, like a Bianca Belair, for an example. All of that accomplished, right? Trying to help out, talents like a Lyra Valkyria, for an example. Still dabbling within the main event scene with the likes of Seth Rollins, AJ Lee. She brought back out of retirement for the most part. That's Becky Lynch. Now, I'm not going to say that she's the top woman of this entire list. Stay tuned. But I can tell you without a shadow of a doubt that Becky Lynch, to me at least, is the number one wrestler that has come out of the women's revolution. Bar none. like I said, everything that everybody felt like Charlotte should have been, Becky Lynch was, and more. You can like it, you can hate it, but that's just the objective truth. 24, Daniel Bryan, or as we know him today, Bryan fucking Danielson. And what can I say about Bryan Danielson that hasn't been said already by me throughout this entire list? Because I think I put him over like 3 or 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 damn times throughout this entire list before we even got to this point right here. But Bryan Danielson is arguably the greatest in-ring technician, maybe the most, in my opinion, the greatest in-ring worker of his entire generation, right? Of his entire generation. Not to, talk about the Mark Awards, but even Dave Meltzer named a, award after him. That's how good of a wrestler he is, right? That's what people like to focus on in that genre regardless. But Bryan Danielson is just such a phenomenal wrestler, right? And to think how he, came to this point, his ROH stuff that he was doing, most people typically focus on, like, the stuff he did with Kenta, for an example, the stuff with Nigel McGuinness. Obviously, coming into this point in time right here in 2010, off of that run of ROH, and, doing some stuff, I think, with Dragon Gate USA as well. Yeah, it was kind of cringe how you had one of the greatest wrestlers in the world having to be mentored by The Miz, of all people. Not a knock on The Miz, but just like, I understand. Even Bryan Danielson said that he owes Miz as far as showing him how to be a character, how to be a performer. He can never show him how to be a wrestler, but he could damn sure show him how to be a performer. There's a big difference, right? How to open up and be more giving as far as funny and entertaining. He showed him how to be an entertainer. And when you look at it through those lenses, I think that's a lot better than just trying to have him as a mentor to be a fucking wrestler, because what the hell can The Miz show Bryan Danielson to do in the ring? That's fucking retarded, obviously. And the whole game show stuff was stupid, but it did. If it did one thing, it did establish the long-standing feud that would go on between a Miz and a Bryan Danielson, right? If it did anything, it did that. And 2011, obviously, that was a pivotal year for Bryan Danielson, who ended up winning the Money in the Bank briefcase, and he used that to win the World Heavyweight Championship. And he did have his angle with AJ Lee that led into some DV territory, if you want to go around that, or woman beater kind of stuff. I mean, he didn't do that explicitly, obviously, but that's the kind of thing that they were kind of leading to. A very misogynistic type of gimmick, I guess you can say, which is like super crazy to think about because it's Bryan Danielson, and I don't think anyone will ever buy him being a misogynist, but that's what they were trying to go towards. And it was the best thing that ever happened to him, right? Like, not the World Heavyweight Championship run, not the Money in the Bank briefcase and all that stuff. What happened afterwards? Because he won the World Heavyweight Championship, and look what happened. He got into his match with Sheamus. Sheamus ended up beating him in like fucking 8 seconds, and that led to Bryan Danielson being a sympathetic person, right? It led to people wanting to get behind Bryan Danielson. And it led to him doing the whole little yes, yes, yes shit, which has become a complete trademark on his entire career. And it led to some stuff with him and Kane, as I touched on a few spots ago, doing the Team Hell No stuff. Right? I don't think I said their team name at the time, but I'm saying it now. Team Hell No. Which opened him up even more to the fans. And then he became an underdog. And, he started to do more and more throughout 2013. And people just really, really loved Bryan Danielson. They really, really fucked with him. And then John Cena chose him to be his competitor, to be his opponent at SummerSlam in 2013, which started off the whole Authority angle, which I will give credit to. The Authority angle as a whole, as a group, was absolute dog shit. But the stuff that they did with Bryan Danielson is a work of art. It is probably, I said for the longest, before the Bloodline stuff started to happen, more in particular with Sammy and Jay, before the Bloodline feud, I would say that was the best angle, or the last great angle in WWE history, was the Authority stuff that happened at late 2013 to, WrestleMania. you know, the work that they were doing as far as trying to stop Bryan Danielson from getting his spot at WrestleMania. You know, the whole Bautista stuff, right? The whole stuff that happened with him and the Wyatt family and the steel cage, and the insane reactions that they were having, the yes movement in the ring. You know, obviously going to, even the video package for WrestleMania, that fucking monster. Mind you, I was like 22 at the time. I still think Austin and Rock has the best video package of all time. And I think number 2 for me personally is probably Triple H and Shawn Michaels. I would, the SummerSlam 2002 one, by the way, I would argue that the Monster one is number 3. I think I like the Bryan Danielson Monster promo going into WrestleMania more than I did Undertaker and Shawn Michaels going into 25. I think I do. Nothing's going to be Austin and Rock, and I have a personal preference for Triple H and Shawn Michaels, but that Monster promo was insane going into WrestleMania 30. And he had to wrestle 2 matches. He did the match with Triple H, which had Triple H pulling out a fucking Tiger Suplex of all things, which is fucking insane. And in the main event, obviously, that led to Bryan Danielson winning the Undisputed World Championships. It's crazy. And, you know, obviously, you know, injury setbacks and, you know, unfortunate losses in Bryan Danielson's family. I think his father passed away, I think, during his honeymoon or during somewhere around the time of his wedding period, not too long after winning the World Heavyweight Championship or the World Championships. And I think his Connor, right, his biggest fan, he passed on as well not too long afterwards. So Bryan Danielson wasn't really in a good headspace, even though he had the World Championship stuff. And then obviously the concussions, they caught up to him, and he had to retire for a little bit in 2016. Came back bigger, better than ever in 2018. And then we get the second half of Bryan Danielson's career, where now he's like this vegan, crazy, insane narcissist, you know, which was fucking fantastic. And now he's the opposite. He's now everything that he hated in 2013, 2014. And now he is the authority who's trying to hold back Kofi Kingston and Kofi Mania. And then obviously he, you know, started to work with, you know, Bray Wyatt and trying to help establish the Fiend gimmick in 2019 or 2020. I think 2019. And in 2020, obviously, going into 2021, he's just more focus-centric on having quality matches. Like, you look at the stuff with AJ Styles, for an example, over the Intercontinental Championship. And yeah, it felt kind of forced that they were trying to put him in that triple threat match with Edge and Roman Reigns. But think about going out on a high like that, right? One of his final matches, that wasn't his final match, but one of his final matches is a WrestleMania main event with the crowds coming back after the COVID time period. Then he transitions over to AEW, and he's having killer matches left and right. Every fucking Bryan Danielson match is a fucking quality match. You know, the matches with Kenny Omega, the likes of Hangman Adam Page, for an example. Obviously, the best AEW match of all time with MJF in their Iron Man match. You know, the stuff that he was doing with Ricky Starks and the whip match, and then obviously the Will Ospreay match, the fucking match that he had, in my opinion, which is one of the best TV matches of that year with Nigel McGuinness. I'm in love with that match as well. The Swerve Strickland stuff he did. It was just, even the Jon Moxley match he did, not the latest one, but the one he did, I think, at Revolution in 2022. Everything Bryan Danielson touched was gold. And I will say this about Bryan Danielson too. Even with all the accolades, the titles, you know, all the stuff, how over he got, it's just crazy to me that, like, I cannot think of one bad Bryan Danielson match. He was one of the only guys to have a great match with The Fiend, for fuck's sakes. When he tried to go for that the Busaku knee, and then The Fiend caught him in midair and hit him with the Sister Abigail. One of the best finishes ever. I don't think I've ever seen a bad Bryan Danielson match. I'm trying to think. I've never seen a bad Bryan Danielson match. Never seen it. Never. I mean, obviously, looking at it from a one-on-one context, I'm not involving tag teams and stuff like that. Just a one-on-one match, I don't think there's such thing as a bad Bryan Danielson match. He's probably had more 4-star matches than most superstars that had 2-star matches. It's the kind of competitor that he is, though. Bryan Danielson, taking up the 24th spot. Number 23, Viva la Raza, Orale Vato, Ese Holmes, Eddie Guerrero, man. I mean, goddamn, if I had $1 for how many times Eddie Guerrero has been mentioned, shit, on this list alone, right? I feel like almost everybody who I had to touch on in the early 2000s, like, you got to involve Eddie in some shape or form, right? I know some people probably argue too, like, Devontae, you have him here? I think Eddie should probably be in the top 20. Once again, I'm talking to wrestling fans who have bought into the propaganda machine of WWE to make you believe that Eddie Guerrero is on the same level as a Hulk Hogan or an Undertaker or an Austin or a Rock or a Cena. He's not. He's not. I'm sorry. I love Eddie, and look how high I have him right here because of what he has done and what he has meant to the business. But I cannot, in good faith, put him in top 20 compared to the people that I already have in the top 20. I can't do that. I can't. What they did for what they did for their respective companies and what they did in their respective careers compared to what Eddie has done, especially in the year 2000, going up into 2005. I mean, I can't. I look at Eddie's run from 2000 to his untimely death in 2005. And a near 6-year run, because Eddie did show up in January of 2000 and he passed away in November of 2005. His very short run with the company, we're not talking about like a Mick Foley situation where everything that he touches in his short time span within each tenure actually meant something. You know, Eddie's run did mean something. It absolutely did. As a matter of fact, you go to the year 2000, right? And look what he did immediately, almost immediately, European champion. After his arm injury, almost immediately he won the European Championship from Chris Jericho after WrestleMania. Right? He's doing this gimmick with China, his mamacita. And look at the character development of Eddie Guerrero, bro. Look at the character growth. You know, you go to Backlash and he has his Cadillac, you know, his Chevy or whatever it was, and he's coming from his prom because he just got his GED, Holmes, and he's gonna take on S.A. Rios in his prom clothes. Bro, excellent fucking work, man. And it culminated in him and China and him getting the Intercontinental Championship by using China in order to do so and turning on China, and you know, all that stuff was fantastic. And he had a little bit of a hiccup, you know, injury with, the injury with Jericho. What was it? I think it was Jericho with the Lion Salt stuff or the Walls of Jericho, and he sat way too back and he messed up Eddie's back for a little bit. Yeah. And again, he had another setback in 2000. This is what I'm saying though. Like, he had another setback in 2001, obviously, with, you know, the rehab stuff. But look what happened when he came back in 2002. Dude took no prisoners. Eddie Guerrero wanted the smoke. He wanted all the smoke, and he got the smoke. Immediately jumped into the Intercontinental Championship feud with RVD, and they had back-to-back excellent matches. The Backlash match I highly recommend, and I especially highly recommend their Judgment Day 2002 match. You know, kind of floundered a little tiny bit, you know, teaming up with Chris Benoit, you know, somewhat aligned with Kurt Angle as well. You know, he had a fine match with Ric Flair too. That was a really fun match. They got the King of the Ring in 2002. And it led into him being a part of the SmackDown 6 stuff, right? I mean, yeah, he did some stuff with Edge as well, obviously culminating in probably the greatest television match of all time, one of the greatest television matches of all time, and then no disqualification match in 2002. But I highly recommend checking out their Unforgiven and SummerSlam 2002 matches as well as a part of their entire trilogy. That led to him teaming up with Chavo Guerrero, Chavito, and Pepe the Horse, if you know, you know. And they did the SmackDown 6 stuff, right? And I'm not going to say the quality of work outside of the SmackDown 6 stuff is a lot to be desired. I didn't really like Chavo Guerrero and Eddie Guerrero's work in the ring post SmackDown 6. Their best work with the SmackDown 6 stuff was exclusively with Edge and Mysterio or Kurt or Chris Benoit. They might have had one or two solid matches with the world's greatest tag team, Charlie Haas and Shelton Benjamin, but I truly believe that like the majority of their good work as a tag team, it was in that. I didn't like the Basham Brother matches all too much, and the latter portions of 2003. I didn't like it all too much. But Eddie did separate a little bit from Chavo after Chavo's injury, I believe, and he did some stuff by himself with Tajiri as a tag team champion, and he turned on Tajiri and he fucked him up. And Eddie ended up winning the inaugural United States Championship after that as a heel. But people loved him so much, they had him flip him back babyface during his feud with Big Show, right? He lost the United States Championship, but he pretty much traded it in for pretty much the World Championship, right? Because he showed himself to be a sympathetic babyface. He showed himself to have a lot of charisma. During that time period, you can argue, like, yeah, you got some people who had gimmicks, like a John Cena, for an example. But as far as straight quality of work, you can argue that Eddie Guerrero had the best mic work of the entire 2000s, based off of the work that he was doing in 2003. Easily some of the best work. And I will say this. About Eddie is that his work in 2003 going into like the middle portions of 2004, it resonated with a lot of people. It resonated. I think that's why I have him so high up on the list, and why people retrospectively look at Eddie in such a way is that I think people, especially that Brock Lesnar promo building up into No Way Out. I live for the high, Holmes. I need that title to show that I succeeded, Holmes. I am high. I am addicted to getting that. It tugged at people because it was like, damn, bro, I go through struggles in my life, and here you have this guy, and he's succeeding in things that were taken away from him. In that championship belt, it signifies that he has actually redeemed himself. A lot of people actually look at that and they say to themselves that that's what that right there, that Addict promo, I think that's what actually signified for people that actually related to Eddie so much. And he had a solid run as a world champion, right? Quality matches with the likes of a Kurt Angle and the likes of a JBL and shit like that. And yeah, it started to whine a little bit going into, obviously, 2005, because, he was losing matches left to right, and eventually him and Ray, I think they lost the tag team championship belts to Eminem, Johnny Nitro, John Morrison, and Joey Mercury, before they themselves started to feud. And like I said, I talked about it already with Rey Mysterio, the Eddie Guerrero feud with the custody over Dominic, the constant obsession with Rey just so he can get a match with him because he has to prove to himself that he could beat him. And Eddie eventually did beat Rey in their steel cage match, which led to Eddie being a heel, and he started to feud with Batista. And then he started to little by little turn back into being a babyface, especially after he had the World Heavyweight Championship. He was going to attack Batista with it at No Mercy, and instead he didn't do it, and that led to Batista beating him. And, unfortunately, we never had the conclusion to that feud because Eddie, unfortunately, passed away before that was actually brought to fruition. And yeah, that's been talked about to death, obviously, when it comes to Eddie. And I think most people, it's like a Tupac or a Biggie or, like a Kurt Cobain situation where it's like people typically focus on how young a person was and what they accomplished prior to their death, and then they die directly after hitting their peak, and it just kind of keeps them forever in that position. I think that's a similar sentiment to how people feel about Eddie nowadays, and it's true to a certain degree. You know what I mean? But it's not about my opinion as far as how I feel about a situation. I can take my subjectivity and mix it in with people's objectivity and then come to a conclusion. And that conclusion is going to pretty much establish why I put Eddie in this position. So, yeah. Former WWE champion, beating Brock Lesnar. Former Intercontinental champion, former United States champion, former tag team champion. Eddie Guerrero. That is what it is. Or that is what it is. I don't know. Orale! Number 22, he's the man called Sting. Now, once again, very similar to Mick Foley. I know most people are going to probably ask, what the hell did Sting do in 2000 or 2010 or whatever in order to get him in a position like this? I think it's pretty evident, right? First and foremost, you talk about his career in TNA and how he helped put them on the map. You know, the establishment of Sting, especially when he came in during the whole run with Christian Cage being the top priority of TNA in 2005, I think Sting, did he show up at, I want to see, man, this is going to be hard. I think he showed up at Genesis, right? Someone can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think he debuted at Genesis in 06 or December of 05, around this time frame. But it's not just that. The hype behind Sting showing up to TNA was not just that. You know what I mean? We're talking about some of the other stuff, Sting, that we're talking about. Obviously, his Bound for Glory match, you know, with passing the torch to AJ Styles in 2008 or 9. I think it was 2009. You know, obviously, his Bound for Glory match in 2007 with Kurt Angle. You know, you're taking the peak of one brand and the peak of the other brand, and you're bringing them together to have this humongous fucking match, right? I still remember the tag team match with Sting and Samoa Joe and Jeff Jarrett and Scott Steiner. Remember that match? I can't remember what show it was, but it was like in 2006. Easily, I think it was in 2006. Sting helped put TNA on the map. He treated TNA very similar as to how he treated WCW. He was very focused on making TNA the next brand to compete with WWE. And what a pattern, right? It's always Sting being the opposition to WWE because he simply cannot work for a company that can claim that they made Sting. I think that has always been Sting's point, was that he can just not give credit to WWE to helping making them, because they didn't. And he doesn't want to give them that credit. Now, the problem does lie in the fact that Sting eventually did show up in WWE. A problem in the sense of, if that was his goal, he failed at it for showing up to WWE. But it is arguably the biggest moment of the 2010s. That might be top 5 biggest moments of the 2010s is Sting showing up to WWE, right? Maybe even top 3. We're talking about the only things that compete with that is maybe the pipe bomb, right? CM Punk's pipe bomb with John Cena. And the 2010s, maybe the Nexus beatdown. And I'm being very lenient on that as well. We're talking about the Shield turn with Seth Rollins. These are things that we're discussing right now as far as the top biggest moments of the 2010s, right? AEW becoming a company. Sting is up there. Sting is up there. That's top 3. Sting might be top 3 showing up at Survivor Series in 2014. And yeah, it didn't work out all too well. His work with Triple H. You know, his unceremonious early retirement against Seth Rollins. Yeah, it didn't work out all too well for him in WWE. Yeah, I get it. But it still, once again, happened. And this is coming off of the heels of what he was doing with TNA when he was establishing them as a brand. Right? And then he eventually shows up in AEW. Mind you, all of these things are done in one period, stemming off of his already legendary run in WCW. All of these things, back to back to back to back to back to back to back. And you can argue, you don't have to like Sting's run in AEW as well. He primarily just did tag team matches, if not only tag team matches, when he teamed up with Darby Allin. But it's not about my opinion. As I said plenty of times before, it's about people's opinion. And people love those matches. The Darby Allin matches that he was doing, people love that shit. People love his retirement at AEW towards the ending period last year at Revolution. People really fuck with that. People like the affiliation, the forever affiliation with a Darby Allin. It seems like that feels like it's always going to be a partnership. That's Sting. That's where it stemmed off of. That was the pattern. He was influential in everything that he took place in, and almost everything that he took place in was always a big deal. Influence really does matter. It is a priority. And if you have high influence in whatever you do, and you make moments like Sting has been making over the last 20 or so years since he debuted in TNA, all the way up until now, all the way up until having the very last match, predating all of this, the very last match in Nitro history was him and Ric Flair. He never put his integrity on the line, and when he did let his guard down, he immediately left. He is one of the most notable names on this list and all over professional wrestling. That's why Sting is this high. That's why Sting is the man. Get it? Good. And finally, to round off 21 through 40, before we get to the last part of the series, number 20, 21 is going to be controversial for obvious reasons. I know a lot of people are going to be upset about this. Fifth time probably saying this. Description box. Go for it. Title. Right there. Hulk Hogan, to me, overall, objectively, is the greatest wrestler of all time. He's not my favorite wrestler of all time, but he is the greatest wrestler of all time. When you take things into equation, you take things into perception as far as him being the biggest star. He was the biggest face of the 80s and arguably the biggest heel of the 90s, right? He was a part of two big wrestling booms. Probably made more money than any wrestler at any given point in time ever. Arguably, right? It's either him or Austin. I get it. I understand. We're looking at what Hulk Hogan did coming out of 2000. The only match that I could think of him in 2000, or the first match that I remember, is him putting his foot on Jeff Jarrett's fucking chest going, you know why we're in this bull? That's why this company's in the bullshit spot that it's in right now, because of bullshit like this. That's what I remember from Hulk Hogan coming out of WCW, putting his foot on Jeff Jarrett's chest, who laid down for him to hand him the World Heavyweight Championship. That's what I remember. What else I remember is 2002, February. The debut at No Way Out. NWO debuts the NWO with Scott Hall, Hulk Hogan, and Kevin Nash. Big pop, humongous pop, crazy pop. Where did that lead to? Arguably the most famous match in wrestling history. Hulk Hogan versus The Rock at WrestleMania X8. I said it once and I'll say it again. From a reaction standpoint, that might be the best wrestling match of all time. They did so little to get so much. It's incredible. I think most people go back to the match not to watch the match, but just to look at the fans and see how they engaged. I think that's why most people go back. They go back to look at the fans and just engage. And that's what you have to do. That's what they did, is what wrestling is all about. And as time started to go on, Hulk Hogan, he did some stuff here and there with the likes of Brock Lesnar, obviously, right? With the likes of Kurt Angle, with the likes of Triple H, with the likes of Undertaker. Never Austin, though. Yeah. He was a former tag team champion with Edge. People don't talk about that, but they forget that. Former undisputed champion as well, obviously, when he beat Triple H at Backlash. Hulk Hogan was having a fun year in 2002. And then he went into 2003. Had an even more funner year, right? Did his match with Vince McMahon, which I would die on this fucking hill. I think that is a dark horse match at WrestleMania 19. I fucking love that match with Vince and Hulk Hogan in the no disqualification match. Vince peeking his head over the ring apron with blood coming down his face. Vince hitting a leg drop off a ladder on Hulk Hogan through an announcement table. Those words just came out of my mouth because it actually fucking happened. The Mr. America stuff he did, I thought it was a good piece of business. Introducing Zach Gowen to get destroyed by Brock Lesnar and make him more of a monster. Good business. Obviously in 2005, coming off of the hills or going towards the Hogan Knows Best stuff, which was a pretty big hit at the time on VH1. His stuff with Shawn Michaels. Obviously, the heel turn heard around the world, right? That only lasted for this match. And then they did the match at SummerSlam. And it is what it is. Oh, the Shawn Michaels Hulk Hogan meme. The Hulk Hogan Shawn Michaels meme. If for anything else, right? And then he did some work with Randy Orton at SummerSlam in 2006. I think that was probably his little... I'm talking about like a real match. Not no like squash match with like some segment bullshit. I think his real-time last full-on match was with Randy at SummerSlam the following year. That I think he actually beat. I think he beat Randy. I think he kicked out of the RKO too, because that's not how we do business here, brother. And then he showed up in TNA in 2010. Signed a contract with him like in 2009 and showed up in 2010. And he was trying, just like Sting, was trying to make TNA a competitor to WWE. And for like the first week or two, it looked like that was going to be the case. And then you realize it's Hogan and Eric, and they do business the Hogan and Eric Bischoff way, right? And one can argue that Hulk Hogan pretty much took away all the aura that TNA ended up having at that point in time. It was his appearance. It was his booking. It was his creative, along with an Eric Bischoff and his prominence on television, that essentially hurt the aura of TNA. But it was his consistency being on television and having that image on television that paved the way for TNA to get dog shit. But it paved the way for something, and it influenced something. I'm not making my case pretty good here, but you get what I'm trying to fucking say here, okay? He's the hoster, brother. The guns, the pythons, 24 inches. Describe my penis also. And he started to pave the way as time started to go forward as far as his influence being looked upon. Obviously, it hit a crescendo in 2015 when some things were said in the privacy of Hulk Hogan's home. Some Nazi words about a certain race of people. My race. He did some stuff to a newspaper organization, or a gossip organization, I guess you can say, and set a precedent in legal cases. That happened as well. Eventually that led into the 2020s, where Hogan had ailing health, and Hogan unfortunately ended up passing away a couple of months ago this year. But man, what a strong 25 years up until his death, right? Almost exactly 25 years up until his actual death. Was Hulk Hogan instrumental in the most negative of ways and also in the most positive of ways? The most polarizing wrestler maybe in the history of the wrestling business, yes, even more than a John Cena, is Hulk Hogan. Because we're not just talking about the kayfabe sense, right? We're not talking about people going at least with John Cena. Most of the time, I don't like his wrestling. I don't like how he conducts himself, but I respect John Cena. I think most people, 95% of people who hate John Cena would say they respect John Cena. They just don't like what he represents in wrestling. With Hulk Hogan, he's polarizing because people, they don't like him and they don't respect him. And some people respect him and some people like him. That is the legacy of a Hulk Hogan. That is what he brings to the table. He brings the element of one of the greatest wrestling matches of all time, one of the best reactions at WrestleMania X8, a dream match of some sorts. The work that he did throughout the last couple of years, the actual attention that he brought upon himself. Again, whether negative or positive, it's up to you. I'm not here to hold your hand. That is what Hulk Hogan represented. And that's why Hulk Hogan is number 21. And that's why he rounds off this list. So that's gonna do it, boys, for 21 to 40. Holy shit, I'm out of breath. This video's gonna be over 2 hours. I know it's gonna be over 2 hours. I can only imagine how the top 20 is gonna be next week. Holy guaca fucking moly. But we have rounded it off and we are making our way towards the ending of this series. So come back next week for the honorable mentions as well, by the way, and the finale of the 100 greatest wrestlers of the 21st century when we go from 20 to number 1. With that being said, though, as always, my name is Millennial Smart, and I'll be catching you fine folks later. Until then, a deuces and a pea ice.